The train's whistle cut through the October air like a rusty blade dragging across bone. Evelyn Mercer pressed her gloved hand against the soot-stained window, watching Blackstone Ridge materialize through the smoke. A collection of weathered buildings clinging to the mountainside like barnacles on a dying ship. The town looked smaller than she'd imagined during all those months of letters, during all those nights she'd read Silas Boone's words by candlelight, until the pages grew soft from handling. My dearest Evelyn, the letters had begun. The West is harsh, but it rewards the brave. I have built something here worth sharing with a woman of courage and grace. She'd read those lines so many times she could recite them from memory. Every word had felt like a promise, like a rope thrown to a woman drowning in the suffocating parlors of Boston society. The train lurched to a stop, metal shrieking against metal. Evelyn stood carefully, smoothing the wrinkles from her traveling dress. Deep blue wool that had cost her 3 months of wages from the textile mill. It was the finest thing she owned, and she'd worn it to make a good first impression on the man who would become her husband. Her hands were shaking. She told herself it was just the cold. The conductor, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, helped her down the steps. "Watch yourself, miss. Platform's uneven." Evelyn's boots touched the rough-hewn planks. The air here smelled different. Wood smoke and pine resin, and something else she couldn't name, something wild and slightly rotten. She clutched her carpet bag tighter and scanned the station platform. There were perhaps 20 people scattered about. Ranch hands in dusty clothes. A woman in a faded calico dress holding a screaming infant. 2 men loading lumber onto a flatbed wagon. And there, near the station house, a group of 5 men in cattlemen's hats, passing a bottle between them and laughing at something. One of them looked up and saw her. "Well, hell," he said, loud enough that his voice carried across the entire platform. "She actually came." The laughter stopped. Every head turned. Evelyn's stomach clenched, but she forced herself to smile. She walked toward the group, her carpet bag bumping against her leg with each step. As she got closer, she recognized the man from the photograph he'd sent. Broad shoulders, dark hair starting to gray at the temples, a mustache that curled at the ends. Silas Boone, her intended. "Mr. Boone?" Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "I'm Evelyn Mercer, from Boston. I believe you've been expecting me?" The men exchanged glances. One of them, younger, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, made a choking sound that might have been suppressed laughter. Silas Boone stepped forward. Up close, his eyes were different from how she'd imagined them, colder. There was whiskey on his breath. "Boston," he said, drawing the word out. "Yeah, I remember now. The letters." He turned to his companions. "Boys, this is the woman I told you about, the one who answered my advertisement." "I answered your courtship letters," Evelyn corrected gently. "You wrote to me first, Mr. Boone, for 7 months. You asked me to come west to marry you. Courtship letters." Silas repeated the words slowly, as if tasting them. Then he started laughing. A deep rolling sound that made something cold settle in Evelyn's chest. "Jesus Christ, you actually thought—" He broke off, laughing harder. The other men joined in. Their laughter bounced off the station house walls, loud and cruel. Evelyn stood very still. "I don't understand." "Sweetheart," Silas said, wiping his eyes, "those letters were a goddamn joke. We were drunk. Peterson here—" He clapped the scared man on the shoulder. "Bet me $50 I couldn't write pretty enough to get some desperate Eastern woman to actually show up. I didn't think anyone would be stupid enough to believe it." The platform seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "You wrote 7 months of letters," Evelyn said slowly. Each word felt like pulling a nail from wood. "You described your ranch, your life. You asked about my family, my interests, my hopes. You sent a photograph. You asked me to be your wife." "Yeah, I put some effort into it." Silas grinned. "Had to make it convincing to win the bet. Peterson's paying up tonight at the saloon. Hell of a payday." The world had gone very quiet. Evelyn was aware of people staring. The woman with the infant. The ranch hands. The station master standing in his doorway with his mouth slightly open. All of them watching this moment, this humiliation, burning itself into their memories so they could retell it later over dinner, over drinks, over card games. "Did you hear about that Boston woman? Came all the way out here because some cowboy wrote her pretty lies. Can you imagine being that foolish?" "I spent every dollar I had," Evelyn heard herself say. "The train ticket cost my entire savings. I quit my job. I gave up my room. have nothing left. Well, that's unfortunate. Silas didn't sound like he thought it was unfortunate at all. But that ain't my problem, sweetheart. You made your choices. Something inside her chest cracked, but she refused to let it show on her face. She'd spent 26 years learning to hide what she felt, learning to smile when men talked over her, learning to nod politely when they explained things she already understood. That training held now, even as her entire world collapsed. I see. Her voice was perfectly calm. Thank you for clarifying the situation, Mr. Boone. She turned away before he could respond, before any of them could see the tremor starting in her hands. She walked back toward the train, but the conductor was already climbing aboard. The locomotive belched steam. The wheels began to turn. Wait! Evelyn started forward, but the train was already moving, already gathering speed. She stood on the platform watching it disappear around the bend, carrying away her last possible escape. Behind her, Silas and his friends were laughing again. Evelyn closed her eyes. Then she opened them. She picked up her carpet bag and started walking toward the edge of the platform, toward the muddy street that led into Blackstone Ridge proper. She had no plan. No money for food or lodging, no way to buy a ticket home, even if home still existed. But she could walk. She could put one foot in front of the other. She could keep moving until she figured out what came next. She made it 3 steps before a voice stopped her. Miss? Evelyn turned. A man stood near the station house corner, tall, lean, with weathered skin and gray eyes that looked like they'd seen more winters than most people could survive. He wore a duster coat, mud-splattered boots, and a hat with a bent brim. There was something careful in how he moved, like a person who'd learned to navigate the world by avoiding unnecessary attention. You got somewhere to go? He asked. It was possibly the stupidest question anyone had ever posed to her. She'd just been publicly humiliated by the man who'd promised to marry her. She'd spent her life savings on a train ticket to nowhere. She was standing in a town where she knew no one, holding everything she owned in a single bag. But what she said was, I'll manage. That wasn't what I asked. Evelyn met his eyes. Up close, she could see the fine lines around them, the small scar on his chin, the way his jaw was set like a man who didn't waste time on pleasantries, but also didn't walk away when something needed doing. No, she said finally, I don't have anywhere to go. The man glanced past her toward Silas and his group, who were still drinking and laughing. Something flickered across his face. Distaste, maybe. Or recognition. Then he looked back at her. Name's Cade Holloway. I got a ranch about 15 miles northeast of here, up in the high country. It's rough land, lonely. Winter comes early up there and stays late, but I've got a spare room and I could use some help with the property. Not charity, he added quickly. Work in exchange for room and board. Evelyn stared at him. You're offering me employment? I'm offering you a place to stay while you figure out your next move. If you're willing to work, I'm willing to house you. Simple as that. You don't know anything about me. I know you came west on a promise that turned out to be horseshit. I know you're standing here without options while those bastards laugh about it. I know you didn't break down crying or start screaming, which means you got more spine than most. Cade shifted his weight, uncomfortable with his own speech. My wagon's over by the livery. If you want to come now. I've got supplies to load, and I aim to be gone within the hour. Why would you help me? Because Silas Boone is a son of a bitch, and I don't like seeing people get treated like dirt for entertainment. Cade's voice was flat, matter of fact. And because I got too much land and not enough hands to work it. You can handle ranch work. I've got a place for you. You can't? You're welcome to stay until you can afford a ticket back east. Your choice. Evelyn looked at him. The stranger offering her salvation, or possibly something worse. She'd been taught her entire life not to trust men, especially men who made promises. And here was another man, another promise, another risk. But what was her alternative? Sleep in the street? Beg for scraps? Throw herself on the mercy of a town that had just watched her humiliation with entertainment rather than sympathy? I can work, she said. I'm strong. I learn quickly. Good enough. Cade turned and started walking toward the far end of the street. Come on then. Evelyn picked up her carpet bag. Behind her, Silas called out, Hey Holloway, you collecting strays now? Cade didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge the question, just kept walking. Evelyn followed him. The wagon was older than most of the buildings in town. with wooden wheels that looked one pothole away from disintegration. 2 horses stood in the traces, bays with shaggy winter coats already coming in thick. Cade loaded the last of his supplies, sacks of flour and cornmeal, salt pork wrapped in cloth, ammunition boxes, a replacement axe handle. Evelyn climbed up onto the bench seat, her carpet bag clutched in her lap. The blue wool dress was already getting dirty. Cade settled beside her and took up the reins. "Fair warning," he said. "The road up to my place ain't gentle. And once we're there, you'll be pretty isolated. Nearest neighbor is 4 miles off. Town's a half-day ride. If you change your mind about coming, say so now." "I won't change my mind." He studied her for a moment, then nodded and clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon lurched forward. They rolled out of Blackstone Ridge in silence. Evelyn watched the town recede behind them. The sagging storefronts, the muddy streets, the station platform where her life had shattered less than an hour ago. She wondered if she'd ever see it again. Part of her hoped she wouldn't. The road climbed steadily into the mountains. Pine trees crowded close on both sides, their branches heavy with cones. The air grew thinner and colder. After a while, Cade spoke. "You got family back east?" "An aunt in Connecticut. We're not close." "Anyone you need to write to? Let them know you're safe?" Evelyn almost laughed. Safe. What an optimistic word. She was in a wagon with a man she'd met 20 minutes ago, heading into wilderness she'd never seen, toward a future that was completely undefined. "No," she said. "There's no one." Cade nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. They rode in silence for another hour. The road got worse. More rocks, deeper ruts, places where washouts from spring runoff had carved gullies across the track. The wagon jolted and swayed. Evelyn held onto the bench with both hands. "Can I ask you something?" she said eventually. "Go ahead." "Why did you really offer to help me?" The truth. Cade was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "I had a sister once. She married a man who made her promises, and then he drank himself mean and made her life hell. By the time someone thought to check on her, it was too late." He paused. "I wasn't there to help her. Didn't even know she needed help until it was done. So when I see a woman in trouble, I figure maybe I can make up for that. Even just a little." Evelyn didn't know what to say to that, so she said, "I'm sorry about your sister." "Yeah, me too." The sun was low in the sky when they finally crested a ridge and Cade pulled the horses to a stop. "There," he said, pointing. Below them spread a valley, narrow and steep-sided, with a creek running through the center. Pine forest climbed the surrounding slopes. And there, beside the creek, sat a cabin made of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney and a roof that looked like it had seen better decades. Nearby stood a barn in slightly worse condition, a corral with sagging rails, and what might have once been a chicken coop before something knocked half of it down. It looked like the end of the world. "Home," Cade said simply. They descended into the valley as twilight gathered. By the time Cade pulled the wagon up in front of the cabin, full dark had fallen. He climbed down and helped Evelyn descend, then lit a lantern and led her inside. The cabin was one large room with a sleeping loft accessible by ladder. There was a fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, shelves holding supplies, and a narrow bed in the corner. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust. "Loft's yours," Cade said, hanging the lantern on a hook. "I'll sleep down here. There's blankets up there, and I'll bring in your bag. Fire'll warm the place up quick enough." He moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, building up the fire, pumping water into a kettle, setting it on the stove to heat. Evelyn stood by the door, suddenly uncertain. The events of the day crashed over her all at once. The train, the station, Silas's laughter, this strange man's unexpected kindness, the long ride into country so remote it might as well be another planet. "I don't even know what time it is," she said quietly. Cade glanced at her. "Late. You should eat something and get some rest. Tomorrow we can figure out the work arrangement." He ladled beans from a pot into 2 tin bowls, handed her one with a spoon. They ate standing up. The beans were lukewarm and under-seasoned, but Evelyn was too exhausted to care. When she climbed the ladder to the loft, she found a straw mattress, a wool blanket that smelled of cedar, and a pillow that had seen better years. Through the small loft window, she could see stars, more stars than she'd ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Below, she heard Cade banking the fire, moving around the cabin with quiet efficiency. Evelyn lay down fully clothed, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and closed her eyes. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a man who didn't exist, and she'd ended up in a mountain valley with a stranger who'd asked nothing in return for his kindness except work. She couldn't decide if that made her lucky or doomed. Morning came with cold sunlight and the smell of coffee. Evelyn descended the ladder to find Cade already up, feeding wood into the stove. He glanced at her but didn't speak, just poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it over. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "There's a basin on the porch if you want to wash up. Water's cold, but it'll wake you." She stepped outside into air so crisp it hurt to breathe. The valley looked different in daylight, wilder, more exposed. The surrounding mountains rose steep and forested, their peaks already dusted with early snow. The creek rushed past brown with silt. Everything felt oversized, as if the landscape itself was trying to crush anything human that dared to settle here. Evelyn washed her face and hands in water cold enough to make her gasp. Then she went back inside. Cade was at the table, drinking coffee and staring at nothing. When she entered, he looked up. "Here's how this works," he said. "I've got 70 acres, about half of it usable for grazing. I run 20 head of cattle, a few horses, some chickens when the foxes don't get them. The work is constant. Fences need mending, animals need tending, firewood needs cutting, supplies need hauling. Winter's coming fast up here, and there's 100 things that need doing before the snow gets deep." "All right," Evelyn said. "You'll earn your keep by helping with that work. I'll show you what needs doing and how to do it. Some of it's hard labor, some of it's dangerous, all of it's necessary." He paused. "You're not a prisoner here. If you want to leave, I'll take you back to town whenever you ask. But while you're here, I expect you to pull your weight. That's fair? One more thing." Cade's eyes were serious. "I ain't looking for companionship or anything else. This is work. That's all. We clear?" "Perfectly clear." He studied her for a moment, as if trying to determine whether she really understood. Then he stood. "Get changed into something you can work in. We're starting with the south fence today. Cattle broke through last week, and I haven't had time to fix it." Evelyn went back up to the loft and changed into her simplest dress, brown wool, already worn thin at the elbows. It would have to do. She didn't own any clothes meant for ranch work. When she came back down, Cade handed her a pair of work gloves. "Wear these. Otherwise your hands will be bleeding by noon." They walked out to the barn where Cade loaded tools into a wooden cart. Rolls of wire, fence posts, a mallet, pliers. Then they headed south through the valley, following the fence line. The damage was worse than Evelyn had expected. A section of fence about 20 feet long had been trampled into the dirt. The post snapped, the wire tangled and useless. "Christ," Cade muttered. "Thought it was just a few posts." They worked in silence. Cade pulled the broken post from the ground while Evelyn coiled the ruined wire. Her hands cramped inside the gloves. Her back started aching. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning chill but not warming her enough to stop shivering. After 2 hours, Cade called a break. He'd brought a canteen of water and some dried beef wrapped in cloth. They sat on the ground and ate without talking. "You're doing all right," Cade said eventually. "I'm slowing you down." "You're learning. That's different." He took a drink from the canteen. "Most people from the city would have quit by now, or complained enough that I'd have sent them back. I don't quit easily. I'm starting to see that." They worked until mid-afternoon, digging new post holes, setting the posts, stringing fresh wire. Evelyn's hands blistered despite the gloves. Her shoulders screamed, but she didn't stop. When they finally finished and headed back toward the cabin, the sun was low again, a full day gone, and they'd repaired one section of fence. "Tomorrow we'll check the north pasture," Cade said. "Make sure none of the cattle wandered off." Evelyn nodded. She was too tired to speak. That night, she ate beans and cornbread, washed her face in cold water, and climbed to the loft without saying goodnight. She fell asleep before she even pulled the blanket up. The days developed a rhythm. Wake before dawn. Coffee and cornbread. Work until the light failed. Eat something simple. Sleep like the dead. Repeat. Evelyn learned to mend fences, to chase cattle out of gullies, to split firewood with an axe that felt impossibly heavy until it didn't anymore. She learned to read the weather by watching the clouds build over the peaks. She learned which plants the horses would eat and which ones would make them sick. She learned to move carefully around the barn because mice had nested in the hay, and disturbing them meant dealing with a panicked horse. Cade taught her without much talking. He'd show her how to do something once, maybe twice, and then expect her to remember. If she forgot, he'd show her again without comment. He never got impatient, never raised his voice, just corrected her mistakes quietly and moved on. After 2 weeks, her hands stopped blistering and started forming calluses instead. Her muscles stopped screaming and started just aching. She got used to the cold water, the early mornings, the constant physical exhaustion. She also got used to Cade's silences. He wasn't unfriendly exactly. He just didn't waste words. Sometimes they'd work for hours without speaking. Other times he'd make an observation about the weather or the livestock, and she'd respond, and that would be the extent of their conversation. But slowly, in small pieces, she learned about him. He'd been a soldier once. That much was clear from the way he moved, the way he scanned the tree line every evening before dark, the way he kept his rifle within reach, even when they were just working near the cabin. He'd lost people. Not just his sister, others too. He never said who or how, but sometimes she'd catch him staring at nothing with an expression that looked like old grief worn smooth by time. And he was lonely, not in a way he'd ever admit, but it showed in small things. The way he seemed slightly surprised when she spoke to him, as if he'd forgotten anyone else was there. The way he'd made too much coffee, enough for 2 people, even before she'd arrived. One evening in early November, a snowstorm rolled in. They were out checking the cattle when the first flakes started falling. Within minutes, the world turned white. "Shit," Cade said, which was about as worked up as Evelyn had ever heard him. "We need to get back. Now." They half ran, half stumbled back toward the cabin. The wind picked up, driving snow into their faces until Evelyn couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. She focused on Cade's back, on keeping him in sight, on putting one foot in front of the other. By the time they reached the cabin, her face was numb, and her lungs burned from breathing frozen air. Inside, Cade built up the fire until the stove glowed red. He pulled out extra blankets, checked the food supplies, made sure the water barrel was full. "Storm like this could last days," he said. "We're stuck here until it blows over." Evelyn nodded. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold her coffee cup. "You all right?" Cade asked. "Just cold." He studied her, then went to his trunk in the corner and pulled out a heavy wool coat. "Here, wear this. That's yours. And I've got another one. Put it on before you freeze." She pulled on the coat. It was too large, hanging past her knees, but it was warm. It smelled like wood smoke and something else. Leather, maybe, or pine sap. The storm hit in earnest after dark. Wind screamed around the cabin. Snow piled against the door. The whole structure creaked and groaned like it might blow apart. Evelyn lay in the loft listening to it, wondering if the cabin would hold. Below, she could hear Cade moving around, feeding the fire, checking the windows. "You awake up there?" he called. "Yes." "Don't worry, cabin's been through worse." "How do you know?" "Because I built it." That surprised her. "When?" 6 years ago, after I left the army and decided I was done with people. A pause. "Mostly." Evelyn smiled in the darkness. It was the closest thing to a joke she'd heard from him. The storm lasted 3 days. They spent that time trapped inside, rationing firewood, melting snow for water, eating through their supplies. Cade worked on repairing tack. Evelyn mended clothes. They played cards with a deck so old the numbers had worn off some of the cards. And they talked. Not constantly, not like people who felt obligated to fill silence, but in fits and starts, trading pieces of their stories. Cade told her about the war. Not the fighting, but the after. The way he'd come home to find everything changed, everyone gone, or moved on. The way he'd tried to settle back into normal life and found he couldn't stand being around people anymore, couldn't stand the noise and the expectations and the constant press of civilization. Evelyn told him about Boston, about the textile mill where she'd worked 14-hour days in air thick with cotton dust, about her parents, both dead from influenza when she was 19, about the suffocating propriety of boarding house life, The constant surveillance of landladies and other tenants, the way a woman alone was always suspect. That's why you answered the letters, Cade said. It wasn't a question. I wanted something different, something of my own. Evelyn stared at the fire. I knew it was a risk, but I thought the risk of staying was worse. Was it? She considered that. I don't know yet. On the third day, the storm broke. They dug themselves out of the cabin to find the world transformed. Snow lay 3 feet deep across the valley. The creek had frozen solid. The surrounding mountains looked like they'd been carved from white stone. Winter's here, Cade said. Real winter. From now until April, we're basically cut off from town. Maybe longer if the passes stay blocked. What about supplies? We make do with what we have. That's why I spent October stocking up. He glanced at her. You sure you want to stay? Last chance to change your mind. I can probably still get you to town if we leave today. Evelyn looked at the valley, the brutal beauty of it, the sheer hostile magnificence. Then she looked at the cabin, rough and imperfect, but solid. Finally, she looked at Cade, this strange, quiet man who'd given her shelter when no one else would. I'm staying, she said. All right then. He handed her a shovel. Let's dig out the barn before the horses freeze. December arrived with more snow and bitter cold. The days contracted. They worked in the narrow window between dawn and dusk, racing against the failing light. The tasks became harder, breaking ice on the water troughs, hauling firewood through knee-deep snow, keeping the animals fed when everything was frozen. Evelyn had never been so tired in her life, or so strong. Her body had changed. Muscles she hadn't known existed now stood out along her arms and shoulders. Her hands, once soft from millwork, were now tough and scarred. Her face had weathered, her skin darkening despite the cold. She barely recognized herself when she caught her reflection in a basin of water. Cade had changed too, but in a different way. The careful distance he'd maintained started eroding. He laughed occasionally. Actual laughter, not just slight exhales through his nose. He asked her opinions about things. He told stories about his childhood, about growing up on a farm in Missouri before the war. One evening, working together to repair a section of the barn roof, he said, You're good at this, the work. I'm competent. There's a difference. No, you're good. You don't panic when things go wrong. You figure it out. He hammered in a nail with 3 precise strikes. Most people can't handle this kind of life. Too isolated, too hard. They either break or they leave. What about you? I left civilization, came here, built this. He gestured at the valley. But I'm still here, so I guess I didn't break. Neither did I. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. No, he said quietly. You didn't. That night, sitting by the fire after dinner, Cade pulled out a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving. He poured 2 glasses, both small, neither of them wasteful. To making it through, he said. They drank. The whiskey burned going down, but it left warmth behind. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said. Go ahead. Do you ever regret coming out here, building this place, being so far from everything? Cade was quiet for a long time. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant voices. Sometimes, he said finally, loneliness gets heavy after a while. But then I think about going back, to towns, to people, to all that noise and falseness. And I know I can't do it. This is hard, but it's honest. Out here things are what they are. No pretending. Is that enough? Honesty? Has to be. It's all I got. Evelyn understood that. She'd lived enough of her life surrounded by lies. Polite lies, necessary lies. Lies people told to smooth social interactions and maintain appearances. Out here there was no room for that kind of performance. You either did the work or you didn't. You survived or you failed. It was brutal but simple. I think I prefer this, she said, even with everything being so hard. At least it's real. Cade raised his glass slightly. To real things, then. They drank again. Christmas came and went without acknowledgement. New Year passed the same way. Time lost its usual markers and became simply light and dark, work and rest, storm and calm. In mid-January, during a brief break in the weather, a rider appeared. Evelyn was hauling water from the creek when she heard the horse. She looked up to see a man on a gray gelding riding into the valley. Not Cade. The posture was wrong. She dropped the buckets and ran toward the cabin. Cade! He emerged with his rifle already in hand. When he saw the rider, something in his shoulders relaxed, but only slightly. The man pulled up near the cabin. He was older, maybe 60, with a white beard and a marshal's badge on his coat. "Holloway," he said. "Marshal Webb." Cade didn't lower the rifle. "Came to bring you some news, and to check if you'd seen your neighbor lately." "Which neighbor?" "Driscoll. Lives east of you, 4 miles out. His wife came into town last week saying he'd gone out to check trap lines and hadn't come back. We sent men out, but the snow's too deep. Can't find any sign of him." Cade frowned. "When'd he leave?" "Week ago Monday." "That's not good. Weather turned bad right after that." "I know. We think he got caught in it somewhere. Might be holed up waiting for a break. Might be worse." Webb shifted in his saddle. "You willing to help search? I'm asking everyone in the high country to keep an eye out." "Yeah, I'll look. Can't promise anything with the snow like it is." "That's all I'm asking." Webb glanced at Evelyn. "Who's this?" "She works for me," Cade said flatly. "Ranch hand." Webb's eyebrows went up slightly, but he didn't comment. "All right then. I've got 3 other places to visit before dark. You find anything? Send word." He rode off without waiting for a response. Evelyn looked at Cade. "Are we going to search for him?" "We'll keep an eye out when we're checking the herd. But Webb's right. If Driscoll got caught in that storm, there's not much we can do except find his body come spring." It was a harsh assessment, but Evelyn had been in the mountains long enough now to understand the truth of it. Out here, mistakes killed you. Bad luck killed you. Sometimes just being in the wrong place when the weather turned was enough. 2 days later, they found him. They were riding the northern boundary of Cade's property when Evelyn saw something dark against the snow. At first she thought it was a downed tree. Then she saw the boot. Cade. He rode over, dismounted. Together they cleared away snow to reveal a frozen man curled on his side, his face blue, his eyes open and unseeing. He wore a heavy coat and carried a rifle, but neither had saved him. "Christ," Cade said quietly. "That's Driscoll." They wrapped the body in a tarp and loaded it onto Cade's horse. It took them hours to get back to the cabin, and then Cade rode on to the Driscoll place to tell the widow, while Evelyn stayed behind to tend the animals. When Cade returned after dark, he looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. "How was she?" Evelyn asked. "How do you think?" "Her husband's dead. She's alone with 3 kids and winter's only half over." He sat heavily in a chair. "She won't make it. Not out here. She'll have to sell and move back east." "That's horrible." "That's the frontier." Cade's voice was flat. "It doesn't care about fair. It doesn't care about anything." They sat in silence. Evelyn thought about Driscoll's widow, about what it meant to lose everything in a place this unforgiving. She thought about how easily that could have been her, stranded, helpless, destroyed by circumstances beyond her control. But it wasn't her. She was here, in this cabin, with work to do and a roof overhead. She'd survived Silas's betrayal. She'd survived the journey into the mountains. She'd survived the brutal introduction to ranch life. And now she was surviving the winter itself. She wasn't broken. She was becoming something else, something harder, something that might actually last out here. "We should sleep," Cade said. "Tomorrow's going to be long. I promised Webb I'd ride to town and give a report. I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I know, but I will." He looked at her, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. They were partners now, in a way neither of them had planned, but both had come to depend on. "All right," Cade said. "We leave at first light." The ride to Blackstone Ridge took 4 hours through snow that had drifted higher than the horse's knees in places. By the time they reached town, Evelyn's face was numb, and her feet felt like blocks of ice. The town looked different under snow. Smaller. Meaner. The same people who'd watched her humiliation months ago now watched her ride in beside Cade Holloway, wearing men's work clothes and sitting a horse like she'd been born to it. She saw the whispers start immediately. Cade tied their horses outside the marshal's office. "Stay here if you want. This won't take long." I'd rather walk around. I haven't seen buildings in months. He studied her face, then nodded. Meet back here in an hour. Evelyn wandered down the main street, looking at storefronts she barely remembered from her arrival. The general store, the saloon, the dressmaker's shop with its faded curtains. Everything felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, like visiting a place she dreamed about. She was standing outside the mercantile, reading notices posted in the window, when someone spoke behind her. Well, look who it is! Boston! Evelyn turned. Silas Boone stood there, looking exactly the same as the day she'd arrived. Same cattleman's hat, same mustache, same expression of amused contempt. "Mr. Boone," she said evenly, "heard you shacked up with Holloway out in the high country. Didn't expect you to last this long. Most Eastern women break within a month." "I'm not most Eastern women." "Guess not." He looked her up and down, taking in her worn coat, her muddy boots, her weathered face. "Hard to believe this is the same prim little thing who stepped off the train. You look like you've been through a war." "Something like that." "Still, must be tough, living out there with just one man. People talk, you know." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. "Let them talk." "Oh, they will. Already are. Saying all sorts of things about what you're doing up there. What arrangements you got with Holloway." Silas grinned. "Can't blame folks for being curious. Pretty woman, lonely rancher, miles from town. Story writes itself." "The story is that I work for wages and I mind my own business. You should try that sometime." His smile faded. "You got a smart mouth now. That's new." "No, you just never bothered listening before." For a moment, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Then he laughed. That same rolling laugh from the train station. "You know what? I like you better this way. Got some fire in you now. Makes me almost regret that bet." He tipped his hat mockingly. "See you around, Boston." He walked away. Evelyn stood there, shaking slightly. But not from fear, from anger, from the realization that even now, even after everything she'd survived and learned, men like Silas still saw her as something to mock or diminish. She turned and walked back toward the marshal's office, her boots crunching on packed snow. Cade was waiting by the horses. When he saw her face, he frowned. "What happened?" "Nothing. Let's go home." They rode out of town in silence. But when they reached the ridge overlooking the valley, Cade spoke. "Silas say something to you." "How did you know?" "Because I know Silas, and I know that look on your face." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then, "He implied things. About you and me. About what people are saying. People always talk, especially about things they don't understand. Does it bother you?" "No? Does it bother you?" "I don't know." Evelyn stared at the valley below. Their valley, as she'd come to think of it. Part of me wants to ride back there and tell them all exactly what they can do with their gossip, but another part of me knows it doesn't matter what they think. "That second part's right." Cade urged his horse forward. "Come on, let's get home before it gets dark." Home. He'd said it so casually, but the word struck something in Evelyn's chest. When had this place become home? When had she stopped thinking of it as temporary shelter and started thinking of it as hers? She followed Cade down into the valley, into the failing light, into the life she was building one hard day at a time. February brought a thaw. The snow melted enough to reveal brown grass and mud. The creek swelled with runoff. The air smelled different, still cold, but with a promise of spring underneath. They used the break to do all the repairs they'd been putting off. Fix the barn roof properly, mend every section of fence, reinforce the corral, cut firewood to replace what they'd burned through. One afternoon, working to clear deadfall from behind the barn, Evelyn straightened up and realized Cade was watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing, just thinking." "About?" "About how you've changed since October. You're different." "So are you." He smiled slightly. "Yeah, I guess I am." They stood there in the weak sunlight, tools in hand, the sound of the creek rushing past. Something hung in the air between them, unspoken, undefined, but present. Then Cade turned back to his work, and the moment passed. That night, sitting by the fire after dinner, Evelyn said, "Tell me about your family, the ones you lost." Cade was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I had a wife. Before the war. Her name was Sarah. We had a son, Thomas. He was 3 years old. His voice was completely flat, stripped of emotion. I enlisted thinking the war would be over quick. It wasn't. By the time I got back, 7 years had passed. They'd died the winter I was gone. Pneumonia. Both of them, within a week of each other. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Cade? After that, I stayed in the army because I had nowhere else to go. Kept fighting other people's wars. Kept moving. Then one day I woke up and realized I was 40 years old, and I'd spent my entire adult life either killing people or burying them. He stared into the fire. That's when I came here. Built this place. Figured if I was going to be alone, I might as well do it somewhere I could see it coming. You're not alone, Evelyn said quietly. No. He looked at her then. I'm not. Not anymore. The fire popped and crackled. Outside wind moved through the pines. I used to think my life ended on that train platform, Evelyn said, when Silas laughed at me, when everyone watched and no one helped. I thought that was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And now? Now I think maybe that was the best thing, because if he hadn't done that, I never would have come here. I never would have learned what I'm actually capable of. I'd still be in Boston, working in that mill, believing I was powerless. She met his eyes. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was most wrong about who I am. Kay didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was rough. You're the strongest person I've ever met, and I've met a lot of people. Something in Evelyn's chest cracked open. She wanted to say something back, wanted to acknowledge what was growing between them, but she didn't have words for it yet. So instead she just nodded, and they sat together in comfortable silence until the fire burned low and sleep called them to their separate spaces. Decade. March roared in with another storm, smaller than the first, but vicious. They spent 3 days snowbound again, and this time the enforced closeness felt different, charged. Every casual touch, passing a cup of coffee, reaching for the same tool, carried weight. On the third night, unable to sleep, Evelyn climbed down from the loft to find Cade still awake, sitting by the dying fire. Can't sleep either? She asked. Storm's too loud. She sat beside him. They didn't speak, just sat there together, listening to the wind howl and the cabin creak, two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of separate disasters. After a while, Cade said, When spring comes, you could leave. Go back east if you wanted. You've earned enough wages for a ticket and then some. I don't want to leave. You might change your mind when you remember what civilization feels like. No. Evelyn turned to look at him. I won't. This is where I belong now. Here, with you. The words hung between them. Cade stared at her, and she could see him wrestling with something. Fear, maybe, or hope, or both. You mean that? He said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face, rough calluses against her cheek. I can't promise you easy, he said. This life, it's always going to be hard, dangerous, lonely sometimes. And I'm not an easy man to be with. I've got too much damage. So do I. Evelyn covered his hand with hers. But I'm still here, and so are you. Maybe that's enough. He kissed her then, slow and careful, like a man who'd forgotten how to be gentle and was relearning it in real time. Evelyn kissed him back, tasting coffee and wood smoke and something that might have been hope. When they broke apart, Cade rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said quietly, not as a worker, as stay with me, really stay. Yes, Evelyn said. Yes. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the cabin, in the warmth of the fire, two damaged people found something they'd both thought they'd lost forever, a reason to believe in tomorrow. The morning after the storm broke, Evelyn woke in Cade's arms for the first time. They'd fallen asleep by the fire, wrapped in blankets, too exhausted and too content to move to separate beds. Dawnlight filtered through the frost-covered windows, turning everything silver. Cade was already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She said. Just making sure you're real. I'm real. She pressed her palm against his chest, feeling his heartbeat. So are you. He caught her hand, held it there. I haven't felt this way in a long time. I forgot what it was like. What was like? Not being alone. Evelyn understood. She'd spent years surrounded by people in Boston, other mill workers, boarding house residents, strangers on the street, but she'd been profoundly alone. Out here, miles from anyone, she'd found the opposite: connection, belonging. We should get up, Cade said, though he didn't move. Animals need feeding. 5 more minutes. He smiled. It changed his entire face, made him look younger. 5 minutes. They lay there as the cabin warmed, as the day began without them for once. Eventually, hunger and responsibility pulled them apart. Cade built up the fire while Evelyn put coffee on. They moved around each other in the small space with new awareness, every accidental touch carrying meaning. After breakfast, they went out to assess storm damage. A section of the barn roof had lost some shingles. One of the fence posts near the corral had snapped. The chicken coop, what was left of it, had blown halfway across the yard. Could be worse, Cade said. Could be better. That's ranch life. Something's always broken. They spent the day doing repairs. The work felt different now, lighter somehow, despite the physical demands. Evelyn caught herself smiling for no reason. Cade whistled while he hammered. They were still doing the same brutal tasks, but the weight of isolation had lifted. That evening, sitting across from each other at dinner, Cade said, "We should talk about what happens next." "All right. I meant what I said last night. I want you to stay, not as hired help, as my—" He struggled for the word. "As my partner in all of this. I want that too. But we need to be clear about what that means. Out here, there's no preacher, no legal paperwork, nothing official. If we're together, it's because we choose to be, that's all." Evelyn set down her fork. "Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to build a life with me. Call it whatever you want. And if I want to call it marriage?" Cade met her eyes. "Then that's what it is. As far as I'm concerned, standing in front of some official doesn't make a thing more real. What makes it real is the choice to stay, every day, even when it's hard." "Especially when it's hard," Evelyn said. "Yeah." She thought about Silas's false promises, the elaborate letters, the photograph, the journey west based on pretty lies. Then she thought about Cade's blunt honesty, his quiet steadiness, the way he'd never once promised her easy, but had given her something better: respect, partnership, truth. "Then yes," she said. "I'll marry you, or partner with you, or whatever we're calling it. Yes." Cade reached across the table and took her hand. His grip was firm, calloused, warm. Good. That night they shared the narrow bed downstairs, learning the shape of each other in darkness. It wasn't the romantic fantasy Evelyn had once imagined. They were both tired, both awkward, both scarred by past losses. But it was real, and that made it better than any fantasy. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Evelyn was washing dishes when she heard horses. She looked out to see 3 riders approaching, 2 men and a woman. They looked weathered, worn, the kind of people the frontier had been grinding down for years. "Cade," she called. He emerged from the barn, saw the riders, and his expression tightened. Not fear exactly, but wariness. The riders stopped near the cabin. The older man, maybe 50, with a graying beard and a hat that had seen better decades, nodded a greeting. "Holloway. Patterson, what brings you up here?" "Heard about Driscoll. Figured we should check on each other. These are hard times to be isolated." Patterson gestured to his companions. "You remember my son, James, and this is Nora Keene. Her husband passed last fall. She's been trying to hold on to their claim." The woman, Nora, looked exhausted. She was young, maybe 30, with dark circles under her eyes and clothes that hung loose on her frame. She nodded at Evelyn without speaking. "Storms have been bad this year," Patterson continued. "Lost 3 head of cattle myself. The gardeners lost their whole south pasture to flooding, and we're hearing rumors from town that make us nervous." "What kind of rumors?" Cade asked. "About Gideon Voss." The name landed like a stone. Evelyn had heard it once or twice in town, whispered, always with fear. Gideon Voss owned the largest ranch in the territory, controlled most of the water rights, and had a reputation for getting what he wanted by any means necessary. "What about him?" Cade's voice was carefully neutral. "He's been buying up land. Small claims, mostly. People who can't make it through another winter. He's offering cash, but not much, and if you refuse..." Patterson shrugged. Let's just say refusing is a bad idea. He can't force people to sell. No, but he can make life hard enough that selling seems like the only option. Cut off access to water, block supply routes, spread lies about land titles, whatever it takes. Patterson shifted in his saddle. He's already got most of the lower valley. Now he's looking at the high country. This land isn't for sale, Cade said flatly. I figured you'd say that, which is why I wanted to warn you. Voss doesn't take no for an answer. You might want to think about what you're willing to fight for. After Patterson and the others left, Cade was quiet. Too quiet. Evelyn found him standing by the corral, staring at the surrounding mountains. Tell me about Voss, she said. He's everything wrong with the West rolled into one man. Came out here right after the war with money from somewhere, nobody knows where exactly, and started buying land. Not because he needed it, because he wanted to own everything, control everything. Cade's jaw was tight. He's got 20 men working for him, maybe more. Some of them are just cowboys. Others are hired guns. And he wants this valley? He wants the water. The creek runs year-round. Most of the streams around here dry up in summer, but this one doesn't. Whoever controls it controls everything downstream. He turned to look at her. I've been here 6 years and never had trouble because I stay out of people's way. But if Voss decides he wants this land, isolation won't protect us. So what do? We hold on. We don't sell. And we hope he loses interest. But Evelyn could tell from his tone that he didn't believe the last part. The next few weeks passed without incident, but tension hung over the valley like smoke. Cade started keeping his rifle closer. He took to writing the property boundaries every few days, checking for signs of trespass. At night, he'd pause sometimes and listen to sounds Evelyn couldn't hear, his whole body alert. You're worried, she said one evening. I'm careful. There's a difference. Is there? He didn't answer. In early April, the real trouble started. They rode to town for supplies and found the general store owner, a man named Hewitt, looking nervous. When Cade asked for ammunition, Hewitt glanced around before speaking. Can't sell you any. Why not? Because Voss put out word. Anyone who does business with you or the other holdouts gets cut off from his supply contracts. Hewitt's voice dropped. I'm sorry, Holloway. I got a family to feed. I can't afford to make him angry. Cade's expression didn't change. What about flour? Salt? I can sell you food, just not ammunition or tools or anything he considers strategic. Hewitt leaned closer. Word of advice. Sell while you still can. Voss isn't playing games anymore. They left with half the supplies they'd needed. Riding back, Cade's silence was darker than usual. We still have ammunition, Evelyn said. Enough for now. It's not about ammunition. It's about what comes next. He's cutting us off from resources, turning the town against us, making it so we can't survive even if we want to fight. So we find another way. What other way? I don't know yet, but I didn't survive everything up to now just to give up because some land baron wants to play tyrant. Cade looked at her, and something like hope flickered across his face. You really think we can win this? I think we can try. And I think not trying is worse than losing. That night, lying in bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling beams and tried to think strategically. Voss had money and men. They had, what? A valley. A cabin. Determination. It didn't seem like enough. But then again, she'd come west with nothing but a carpetbag and a broken heart, and she'd turned that into a life worth defending. Maybe desperation had always been her greatest asset. The next morning, she told Cade her idea. We need allies. Other people Voss is threatening. If we stand together, we're harder to pick off one by one. People are scared. They won't fight. Maybe they will if someone shows them it's possible. Patterson came here to warn you. That means he's worried too. Maybe worried enough to do something about it. Cade considered this. It's risky. Organizing resistance just paints a bigger target on our backs. We already have a target. At least this way we'd have help. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. All right, we'll try. But if this goes wrong, then we deal with it, together. They spent the next week riding to every small ranch and homestead in the high country. Most of the people they found were struggling. Widows trying to hold on to land, young families barely surviving, aging ranchers who'd been worn down by years of hardship. All of them had heard of Voss. All of them were afraid. At the Patterson place, the old man listened to Evelyn's pitch, then shook his head. You're talking about going to war with the most powerful man in the territory. That's suicide. It's suicide to do nothing, Evelyn countered. He's going to take your land either way. At least this way you'd go down fighting. Easy for you to say. You've only been here a few months. Some of us have children to think about. Which is exactly why you should fight. What kind of future do your children have if men like Voss can take whatever they want? Patterson's son, James, spoke up. She's right, Pa. We can't just roll over. Boy, you don't know what you're talking about. I know I'm tired of being scared all the time. I know this land is supposed to be ours, but it doesn't feel like it when Voss can tell us what to do. The argument continued, but in the end, Patterson agreed to think about it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. At Nora Keene's claim, they found the woman trying to repair a collapsed section of roof by herself. She climbed down when she saw them, wiping sweat from her face. If you're here to tell me to sell, save your breath. We're not, Evelyn said. We're here to ask if you want to fight back. Nora's expression sharpened. Against Voss? Against anyone who thinks they can push us around because we're small or isolated or vulnerable. I'm listening. They sat on Nora's porch while Evelyn explained the idea. Nora didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally, her eyes calculating. When Evelyn finished, Nora said, I'm in. Not because I think we'll win, but because I'd rather die trying than live on my knees. It might not come to dying, Cade said. It might. But I buried my husband 6 months ago. I've got nothing left to lose except this land, and if I lose it anyway, at least I'll have tried. Nora met Evelyn's eyes. You've got spine, I'll give you that. Most women would have run back east by now. I'm not most women. No, you're not. They visited 8 homesteads over 10 days. Some people refused outright. Others said they'd think about it. A few, like Nora, committed immediately. By the time they returned to their own valley, they had promises from 5 families. Not many, but more than nothing. Now what? Cade asked. Now we wait, and we prepare. Preparing meant stockpiling supplies, reinforcing the cabin, making sure they had escape routes if things went wrong. It meant practicing with weapons, learning each other's strengths, planning for contingencies. It also meant dealing with the reality that they just made themselves Voss's primary target. The first attack came in early May. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke. She bolted upright, shaking Cade awake. Fire! They ran outside to find the barn burning. Flames licked up the walls, consuming dry wood. The horses screamed inside. Cade ran for the barn door, but the heat drove him back. We can't get in, it's too hot. The animals are already gone. They could only stand and watch as the barn collapsed, taking 3 horses and all their stored hay with it. By the time the fire burned itself out, dawn had broken over the valley. In the ashes, they found the evidence, a coal oil can, deliberately placed. Voss, Cade said, do we go to the marshal? And say what? We have no proof it was Voss specifically. And even if we did, Webb won't touch him. Nobody in town will. Cade's voice was hollow. We're on our own. They spent the day salvaging what they could. The barn was a total loss. 2 of the horses had survived, they'd been in the corral overnight, but the 3rd had died in the fire. All their winter hay was gone. The equipment they'd stored inside was melted or charred beyond use. It was a devastating blow, calculated to cripple them without leaving clear evidence. That evening, Patterson rode up with his son and 2 other men. They looked grim. Heard about your barn, Patterson said. Voss? Most likely. He hit the Gardner place too, poisoned their well. They're packing up, heading to California. Patterson dismounted. I've been thinking about what you said, about standing together. I'm ready to commit. So are these others. Cade looked at the men. Weathered faces, hard hands, eyes that had seen too much but hadn't broken yet. This won't be easy. Voss plays dirty. So will we, one of the men said. His name was Coleman, and he had a scar across his throat from where someone had tried to hang him years ago and failed. I've been poor and scared my whole life. I'm tired of it. What's the plan? Patterson asked. They gathered in what was left of the yard, these desperate people with nothing but determination, and started planning resistance. It felt simultaneously insane and inevitable, like watching a storm build and knowing you couldn't stop it. Over the next 2 weeks, more families joined. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to be a force. Enough to make Voss think twice. They met in secret, rotating locations. They shared resources. They set up a warning system using signal fires on the peaks. They started riding in groups instead of alone, making themselves harder targets. And they waited for Voss's next move. It came in the form of a letter delivered to Cade by a nervous writer from town. "Mr. Holloway," the letter read in elegant script. "I understand you've been organizing your neighbors into some kind of cooperative. While I admire entrepreneurial spirit, I'm concerned about stability in the region. I'd like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. Please meet me at the Silver Creek Saloon on Friday at noon. Come alone. Regards, Gideon Voss." "It's a trap," Evelyn said immediately. "Maybe. Or maybe he wants to negotiate." "You're not seriously considering going?" "I'm considering getting information. If I can understand what he wants, maybe I can figure out how to stop him." "Or he'll just kill you." Cade looked at her steadily. "That's a risk I'm willing to take." "Well, I'm not." Evelyn's voice was sharp with fear and anger. "You're not going alone." "The letter said—" "I don't care what the letter said. If you go, I go. That's not negotiable." They stared at each other, deadlocked. Finally, Cade said, "You're stubborn as hell. I learned from the best." Friday came too fast. They rode to town together despite Voss's instructions, both armed, both wary. The Silver Creek Saloon sat on the edge of Blackstone Ridge, a two-story building that served as unofficial headquarters for Voss's operation. They tied their horses and went inside. The saloon was nicer than most: polished wood, actual glass in the windows, a bar that looked imported from back east. A few men sat at tables, all of them watching, all of them armed. At a table in the back sat Gideon Voss. He was younger than Evelyn expected, maybe 45, with dark hair graying at the temples and a well-tailored suit that looked absurd in frontier town. But his eyes were wrong, empty, like looking into a well with no bottom. "Mr. Holloway," Voss said pleasantly. "And you brought a guest. How unexpected." "This is Evelyn, my wife." Cade's voice was carefully neutral. "Charmed." Voss gestured to the chairs across from him. "Please, sit." They sat. Evelyn kept her hand near the pistol in her coat pocket. "I'll get straight to it," Voss said. "I'm prepared to offer you $5,000 for your property. That's significantly more than it's worth. It's not for sale." "Everything's for sale, Mr. Holloway. It's just a matter of price." Voss sipped his whiskey. "I've done my research on you. Former soldier, widower, been isolated up in that valley for years. You're not a joiner. So why the sudden interest in community organizing?" "People were asking for help. I provided it." "How noble, but also foolish." Voss's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're encouraging people to make a stand they can't win. I have resources you can't match. I have connections in the territorial government. I have men who are very good at their jobs. What do you have? A handful of desperate homesteaders and a woman who doesn't know when to quit." "Careful," Cade said quietly. "I meant no disrespect. In fact, I admire Mrs. Holloway's spirit. It takes courage to stand up to power, even when it's suicidal." Voss leaned forward. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to acquire the land I need, one way or another. The question is whether that happens peacefully or violently. I'd prefer peaceful, cheaper, cleaner, better for everyone." "So you burn down barns and poison wells and call that peaceful?" Evelyn couldn't help herself. Voss looked at her directly for the first time. "I don't know what you're talking about. Though I have heard about some unfortunate accidents in the high country lately. Terrible shame. The frontier can be so dangerous." "We're not selling," Cade said. "Then you're making a mistake, and mistakes out here tend to be fatal." Voss stood. "I'm giving you 1 week to reconsider. After that, I'll take other measures. Measures you won't enjoy." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Voss put on his hat. "Good day, Mr. Holloway. Mrs. Holloway. I hope we don't meet again under unpleasant circumstances." He walked out, his men following. The saloon emptied quickly, leaving Cade and Evelyn alone. "Well," Evelyn said, "that was terrifying." "Yeah. What do we do now?" "We go home. We prepare. And we make sure everyone knows what's coming." They rode back to the valley in tense silence. When they arrived, they found Nora Keene waiting for them, along with Patterson and Coleman. "How'd it go?" Nora asked. He gave us a week, Cade said. Then we've got a week to get ready for war. They gathered everyone that night, all 15 families who'd committed to resistance. They met in a clearing halfway up the mountain, away from prying eyes. A fire burned in the center while people sat in a rough circle, their faces hard and uncertain. Cade explained what Voss had said. When he finished, the silence was heavy. Finally, Coleman spoke. So what's the actual plan? We can't win a straight fight. He's got too many men. Then we don't fight straight, Evelyn said. We use the terrain. We make it too expensive for him to keep pushing. We make every inch of ground cost him something. That's guerrilla tactics, Patterson said. That's war. It already is war. We just haven't been fighting back yet. They talked through the night, planning contingencies. Who would defend which properties? Where to fall back if positions became untenable? How to communicate? How to get women and children to safety if things got really bad? It was exhausting and terrifying and necessary. As dawn broke, people started drifting back to their homes. Nora lingered, helping Evelyn pack up supplies. You know we might all die, right? Nora said conversationally. I know. And you're still doing this? What's the alternative? Run? Let him win? Evelyn shook her head. I didn't survive everything up to now just to surrender when things get hard. You're either the bravest person I've met or the stupidest. Maybe both. Nora laughed, a genuine sound that seemed out of place given the circumstances. I like you, Evelyn Holloway. If we survive this, we should be friends. If we survive this, I'll buy you a drink. Deal. The week passed in a blur of preparation. They moved supplies to hidden caches. They scouted escape routes. They practiced defensive positions. Every day felt like the last day of peace, even though peace had been broken long ago. On the 6th night, Cade held Evelyn close in their bed and said, If this goes wrong, don't. Listen to me. If this goes wrong and you have a chance to run, take it. Don't try to be a hero, just survive. The same applies to you. I'm serious, Evelyn. So am I. She turns to face him in the darkness. We're in this together. That was the deal. For better or worse, remember? I remember. Then stop trying to protect me from my own choices. I chose this. I chose you. I chose to fight. You don't get to decide I should run when things get dangerous. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, you're the strongest person I've ever known. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true. They held each other as the night deepened, two people standing at the edge of an abyss, choosing to jump together rather than watch each other fall alone. Morning came too soon. They were checking the remaining horses when they saw smoke rising from the south. Not close, but not far enough away either. That's Patterson's place, Cade said. They rode hard, arriving to find the house burning. Patterson and his family stood in the yard, watching their lives go up in flames. 3 of Voss's men sat on horses nearby, making sure they watched. When Cade and Evelyn arrived, one of the men grinned. Thought you might show up. Boss wanted to make sure you got the message. What message? Cade's voice was dangerously calm. Time's up. Either sell or burn. Your choice. The man turned his horse. See you soon, Holloway. They rode off laughing. Patterson turned to Cade, his face gray with shock and rage. I'm done being scared. Tell me what you need me to do. That night, they sent word through the signal fires. Everyone who'd committed to resistance gathered at a defensible position halfway up the mountain. An old mining camp with stone walls and clear sight lines. Voss came the next afternoon with 20 men. They rode into the valley expecting easy targets and found fortified positions instead. Evelyn watched from behind a stone wall as Voss pulled his men to a stop, clearly surprised. Holloway, he called, this doesn't have to get bloody. You already made it bloody, Cade shouted back. You burned Patterson's house. You've been terrorizing people for months. I've been conducting business. If people can't handle frontier life, they should sell and move on. Or we could make you move on, Voss laughed. With what? You've got 15 families with hunting rifles. I've got 20 trained men with repeating weapons. You can't win this. Maybe not, but we can make you pay for every inch. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Voss raised his hand and his men spread out looking for angles of attack. The battle that followed wasn't glorious or heroic. It was chaotic and terrifying and brutal. Gunfire echoed off the mountains. People screamed. Smoke from weapons fire made it hard to see. Evelyn fired until her rifle was too hot to touch, then grabbed another one. Beside her, Nora was methodical, picking targets with cold precision. On her other side, Coleman cursed steadily while reloading. Further down the line, she could hear Cade shouting orders, coordinating their defense. Voss's men tried 3 times to rush the position. Each time they were driven back, leaving wounded behind. But the defenders were taking casualties too. One of Patterson's neighbors went down with a bullet in his shoulder. A young woman named Sarah took a round that grazed her head, leaving her bleeding but conscious. As the sun started setting, Voss called a retreat. His men pulled back, carrying their wounded. In the sudden silence, Evelyn realized she was shaking. Her ears rang from the gunfire. Her hands were black with powder residue. Next to her, Nora was crying silently, though whether from fear or relief or both, Evelyn couldn't tell. "We held," Patterson said, disbelief in his voice. "We actually held." "For now," Cade said, "but he'll be back. And next time he'll come prepared." They spent that night fortifying positions, tending wounded, trying not to think about what tomorrow might bring. Evelyn found Cade standing watch on the wall, staring into darkness. "You should rest," she said. "Can't. Too wired." She stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "We did it. We fought back, and we survived. Today we survived. Tomorrow's a different question. Then we'll answer it when it comes." He turned to look at her, and even in the dim light from the watchfires, she could see the fear and hope warring in his expression. "I never wanted this for you, this violence, this danger. I know. But it's not your job to protect me from the world. It's your job to stand beside me while we face it together. When did you get so damn wise?" "When I realized being afraid was just another form of surrender." They kissed, there on the wall under the stars, while around them exhausted people tried to sleep and tomorrow waited with its unknown threats. Whatever came next, they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else, together, stubborn, and refusing to break. Dawn came gray and cold, bringing with it a silence that felt wrong. Evelyn stood on the stone wall watching fog roll through the valley, obscuring everything beyond 50 yards. The kind of weather that made ambushes easy and defense nearly impossible. "I don't like this," Cade said beside her. He'd been up all night, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Can't see anything coming." "Maybe that means they can't see us either. Or maybe it means they're already out there waiting for the fog to lift so they can see their targets clearly." Patterson appeared from below, climbing the rough steps cut into the mining camp's terraced levels. He carried 2 tin cups of coffee, both steaming in the cold air. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing them over. "Any sign of movement?" Cade asked. "Nothing. But Coleman swears he heard horses about an hour ago, southeast of here. Could have been wild ones. Could have been scouts." They drank in silence, watching the fog. Around them, people were waking, checking weapons, eating cold food, whispering nervously. Children huddled close to their mothers. The wounded from yesterday's fight lay on bedrolls in what had once been the mine's equipment shed, their groans audible even from the wall. "How much ammunition do we have left?" Evelyn asked. "Enough for maybe one more serious fight," Cade said. "After that, we're down to throwing rocks." "Then we better make it count." The fog started lifting around mid-morning, burning off in patches. What it revealed made Evelyn's stomach clench. Voss's men hadn't retreated far. They'd set up camp about a quarter-mile south, just within rifle range if you had good aim and didn't mind wasting bullets. Smoke from their cook fires drifted up into the clearing sky. She could see men moving around, tending horses, cleaning weapons. They looked organized, professional, not at all like people who were planning to give up. "Count them," Cade said. Evelyn did, carefully. "I see maybe 15. Where are the other 5? "Good question." The answer came an hour later when gunfire erupted from the north. Not close, but not far enough away either. The sound echoed off the mountains, making it hard to pinpoint exactly. "That's the Ferguson place," Patterson said, his face going pale. "My nephew lives there with his wife and baby." "It's a distraction," Cade said. "Voss is splitting our forces. If we send people to help the Fergusons, we weaken our position here." "We can't just leave them." "I know." Cade turned to Coleman. "Take 3 men, fast horses. Get to Ferguson's, drive off whoever's attacking, then get back here as quick as you can. Don't engage unless you have to." Coleman nodded and disappeared down the steps, already calling out names. What if it's a trap? Evelyn asked. Then we're about to find out how much Voss is willing to sacrifice to get what he wants. They watched Coleman and his group ride out, disappearing into the tree line to the north. The gunfire continued sporadically. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Evelyn's hands were cramped from gripping her rifle too tightly. Then new movement from the south. Voss's main camp was stirring, men mounting horses, forming up into two groups. Not attacking yet, just preparing, showing that they could. He's playing with us, Nora said. She'd taken position on the wall next to Evelyn, her face hard. Trying to make us scared. It's working, Patterson muttered. Being scared is fine, Cade said. Being paralyzed by it is the problem. Stay alert. Don't fire unless they make a move. More waiting. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the fog. The day was turning out clear and bright, the kind of weather that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Instead, it just meant they could see death coming from further away. Coleman returned 2 hours later, his horse lathered with sweat. His group had lost one man, young Timothy Harrison, who'd taken a bullet through the chest and died before they could get him to cover. Ferguson's place is gone, Coleman reported. Burned to the ground. The family got out barely. 3 of Voss's men were there. We killed one, wounded another. The third got away. Where's the Ferguson family now? I sent them east toward the territorial line, told them to keep riding and don't look back. Coleman's jaw was tight. That boy was 17 years old. Never hurt anyone in his life. The anger that rippled through the camp was palpable. People who'd been wavering, who'd been questioning whether this fight was worth it, suddenly had their answer written in blood. Timothy Harrison had been someone's son, someone's friend, and he died defending his home from a man who wanted to steal it. We need to end this, James Patterson said. He was maybe 22, tall and thin with his father's eyes. We can't just sit here waiting for him to pick us off one by one. What do you suggest? Cade asked. We take the fight to him. Hit his camp tonight, even the odds. That's suicide, his father said immediately. So is sitting here. He's got us pinned down. He's burning out anyone who isn't fortified. Eventually, he'll just wait us out until we run out of food or ammunition or both. The boy's not wrong, Coleman said quietly. We're defending, which means Voss controls the tempo. As long as he's patient, he wins. Cade looked at Evelyn. She knew what he was asking without words. What do you think? She thought about the barn burning, about Patterson's house in flames, about Timothy Harrison, 17 years old, dead in a fight he shouldn't have had to fight, about all the people here who trusted them to lead this resistance. We need to change the game, she said. But a direct assault on his camp, isn't it? We'd be slaughtered. Then what? James demanded. We hurt him where it matters. His supplies. His horses. His confidence. Evelyn was thinking out loud now, the pieces falling into place. He's comfortable because he thinks he can outlast us. What if he couldn't? Cade caught on immediately. A raid, small group, tonight, hit his supply wagons and scatter his horses. Exactly. Make him worry about logistics instead of tactics. That's still dangerous, Patterson said. Everything's dangerous now, Nora said flatly. At least this way we're doing something. They spent the rest of the day planning. The raid would be small. 6 people, all volunteers. They'd go in after midnight when Voss's men would be tired from standing watch. The goal wasn't to kill anyone, though they'd defend themselves if necessary. The goal was chaos and material damage. Cade insisted on leading it. Evelyn insisted on going with him. They argued about it until Nora cut them off. Both of you are going, and we all know it, so stop wasting time. Who else? Coleman volunteered immediately. So did James Patterson, despite his father's protests. 2 others joined, a quiet man named Briggs, who'd been a scout during the war, and a woman named Ellen, whose husband had died in yesterday's fighting, and who looked like she wanted revenge more than safety. As darkness fell, they prepared, checked weapons, darkened their faces with ash, said quiet goodbyes to people who might not see them again. Evelyn found Cade checking his rifle for the 3rd time. We don't have to do this, he said without looking up. Yes, we do. I mean, you don't have to go. I can lead the others. We've been through this. I know. He finally met her eyes. I just need to say it out loud. If something happens to you, then something happens. But I'm not staying behind while you risk your life. That's not who we are. He reached out and pulled her close, holding on like she might disappear. When this is over, assuming we survive, I'm taking you somewhere peaceful. Maybe California. Maybe Oregon. Somewhere without guns and land barons and constant violence. You'd hate it within a week. Maybe. But at least you'd be safe. Safe is overrated. I'd rather be alive. They held each other until it was time to go. Then they joined the others near the north wall, where the shadows were deepest and the sentries couldn't easily see them leave. "Everyone clear on the plan?" Cade asked in a low voice. Nods all around. "Then let's move." They slipped out through a gap in the stone wall and disappeared into the darkness. Moving through the forest at night was treacherous. Roots to trip over, branches to snap, 1,000 ways to make noise and give themselves away. But they went slow, testing each step, using hand signals instead of words. It took them over an hour to cover the ground to Voss's camp. They stopped about 100 yards out, crouching in the undergrowth while Briggs scouted ahead. He returned after 10 minutes, gesturing for them to gather close. "4 men on watch," he whispered. "2 by the supply wagons, 1 with the horses, 1 roaming. Everyone else is asleep or in tents." "We split up," Cade said. "Briggs, Coleman, you take the wagons. Set them on fire and fall back. James, Ellen, you scatter the horses. Drive them north, away from the camp. Evelyn and I will cover you both and handle anyone who wakes up. Questions?" "If we get separated?" James asked. "Rendezvous point is the lightning-struck pine we passed on the way in. If someone's not there by dawn, assume they got caught and don't wait." They moved into position. Evelyn's heart hammered so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She gripped her rifle and tried to remember Cade's lessons about breathing, about staying calm under pressure, about not hesitating when action was required. Briggs and Coleman reached the wagons first. Evelyn watched them work, pouring out sacks of flour and cornmeal, slashing water barrels, setting fires with phosphorus matches. The flames caught quickly, jumping from wagon to wagon. That's when someone shouted. The camp exploded into motion. Men stumbled from tents, grabbing weapons, trying to figure out what was happening. James and Ellen spooked the horses, sending them stampeding through the camp and adding to the chaos. Cade fired twice, dropping the sentry who'd been rushing toward Coleman. Evelyn aimed at a figure silhouetted by firelight and squeezed the trigger. The man went down. Whether dead or wounded, she couldn't tell. "Fall back!" Cade yelled. They ran. Behind them, more gunfire erupted, bullets whipping through the trees. Evelyn didn't look back, just focused on keeping up, on not tripping, on staying alive for 5 more seconds, then 5 more after that. They'd made it maybe 50 yards when Ellen screamed. Evelyn turned to see her down, clutching her leg. James skidded to a stop, trying to pull her up. "Leave me!" Ellen shouted. "Like hell!" Cade and Evelyn ran back. More men were coming through the trees, muzzle flashes bright in the darkness. Coleman appeared from the left, firing to provide cover. Briggs grabbed Ellen under one arm while James took the other. They stumbled forward, half carrying Ellen between them. She was leaving a blood trail, but they couldn't stop to check the wound. More bullets chased them through the forest. Someone was shouting orders behind them. Voss's voice, Evelyn realized, commanding his men to pursue. They ran for what felt like miles, but was probably only minutes. Finally, Cade called a halt in a small ravine where they'd have some cover if it came to a firefight. Ellen's leg was bad. The bullet had shattered her shin bone, the break visible through her torn pants. She was pale with shock and trying not to scream. "We need to get her back," James said. "We need to stop the bleeding first, or she'll be dead before we get halfway," Nora said. Wait, when had Nora appeared? Evelyn blinked and realized the woman must have followed them out from camp. She had bandages and whiskey and was already working on Ellen's leg with calm efficiency. "They're going to track us," Coleman said. He was breathing hard, reloading his rifle. "Blood trail's too obvious." "Then we buy time," Cade looked at Evelyn. "You get her back to camp. I'll stay here with Coleman and Briggs. Slow down anyone following." "No." "Evelyn." "I said no. We all go together or we all stay together. That was the deal." "She'll die if we wait." "Then we better move fast." They fashioned a rough stretcher from branches and coats. Ellen bit down on a leather strap to keep from crying out as they lifted her. Then they started moving again, slower this time, taking turns carrying the stretcher while the others kept watch. Behind them, they could hear pursuit. Voss's men were tracking them, and they weren't being subtle about it. Voices called out to each other, torches flickered between the trees. "They're hurting us," Briggs said suddenly, "pushing us east." "Why?" James asked. "Because that's where the ravine narrows. They're going to bottle us up and finish us." Cade cursed. "Can we circle back?" "Not carrying wounded. They'd catch us before we got 100 yards. They were trapped. Evelyn could feel the walls closing in, literal and metaphorical. Behind them, pursuit. Ahead, a geographical trap. No good options. "We make a stand," she said. "Here?" Coleman looked around at the terrain. "It's terrible ground." "Then we better be creative." Evelyn was thinking fast now, desperation sharpening her mind. "The ravine narrows, right? That means they have to come at us from limited angles. We set up crossfire, make them pay for every foot. They'll still overwhelm us eventually. Eventually's better than immediately. And maybe, if we hold long enough, someone from camp will hear the fighting and come help." "That's a lot of maybes," James said. "You got a better idea?" Nobody did. They found a defensible position where the ravine walls rose steep on both sides, and a fallen tree provided some cover. They set Ellen down behind the log, gave her a rifle, and fanned out to create overlapping fields of fire. Then they waited. The pursuit caught up within minutes. Evelyn saw movement in the trees, counted at least 8 men. They'd figure out the situation quickly, that the raiders were cornered, that finishing this would just take patience and bullets. Someone called out from the darkness, "You got nowhere to go. Send out the woman and we might let the rest of you live." Cade didn't waste breath responding. He just raised his rifle and fired. The muzzle flash lit up the ravine for a split second. Someone in the trees screamed. That started it. Gunfire came from multiple directions at once. Evelyn fired, ducked, reloaded, fired again. Beside her, Coleman was doing the same, his movements mechanical and efficient. James was on the other side of the log, taking careful shots and cursing when he missed. The fight was brutal and close. Men advanced through the trees and were driven back by concentrated fire. They tried flanking and found the terrain wouldn't allow it. They tried rushing and left 2 men bleeding in the dirt. But slowly, inevitably, Voss's men were gaining ground. The defenders were running low on ammunition. Ellen had passed out from blood loss. Briggs took a bullet through his shoulder and could barely hold his rifle anymore. "This is it," Coleman said, almost conversationally. "Been nice knowing you folks." "Save the eulogy," Cade said. "We're not dead yet." Then, from somewhere above them on the ravine's rim, new gunfire erupted. Evelyn looked up to see muzzle flashes, heard men shouting in surprise. Voss's attackers suddenly had enemies behind them. The relief force from camp had arrived. What followed was chaos. Voss's men, caught between 2 firing positions, broke and ran. A few tried to make a stand and were cut down. The rest disappeared into the forest, leaving their wounded behind. Patterson appeared at the ravine's edge, looking down. "Everyone alive down there?" "Mostly," Cade shouted back. They hauled Ellen and Briggs up using ropes. The climb back to camp took hours, moving carefully in the dark with wounded to carry. By the time they arrived, dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and red. The camp erupted in cheers when they saw the raiding party return. People crowded around, wanting details, celebrating the small victory. But Evelyn just felt exhausted. They'd destroyed some supplies and scattered some horses. They'd also nearly gotten killed and lost 2 people to serious injuries. Some victory. She found a quiet corner and sat down heavily. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline crash. Her clothes were stiff with dried blood. Ellen's, probably, though some of it might be her own from cuts she hadn't noticed getting. Cade sat beside her. He looked as wrung out as she felt. "You were right," he said. "About what?" "About this being worth fighting for. About not surrendering." He took her hand. "I spent years hiding up in that valley, telling myself I was done with caring about anything. Then you showed up and reminded me what it feels like to have something worth protecting. We almost died tonight. But we didn't, and we hurt him. Maybe not enough to end this, but enough to show him we're not easy prey." Evelyn leaned against his shoulder. "How much longer can we keep this up? I don't know. But however long it takes, we do it together." They sat there as the camp came alive around them, as people tended wounds and celebrated survival and prepared for whatever came next. The sun rose higher, burning away the darkness, promising another day of uncertainty and danger and stubborn defiance. Voss didn't attack again that day, or the next. His camp stayed visible in the distance, but his men made no moves. Scouts reported he'd lost 6 men in the raid, 3 dead, 3 wounded badly enough they couldn't fight. His supplies were devastated, and his horses were scattered across 10 miles of forest, most of them probably gone for good. It wasn't a crushing blow, but it was something. It proved the defenders could strike back. It proved Voss wasn't invincible. On the 3rd day, a rider approached under a white flag. Not one of Voss's men, but Marshal Webb from town. "I want to talk to Holloway," he called out. They let him in. He looked tired, his uniform dusty, his face drawn. He dismounted and accepted the water they offered, but declined to sit. "Voss sent me," he said without preamble. "He wants to negotiate." "He tried that before," Cade said. "It didn't work." "Well, circumstances have changed. You hurt him with that raid. He's angry, but he's also practical. He knows dragging this out is expensive." Webb pulled out a folded paper. "He's prepared to make a new offer. Leave you and your immediate neighbors alone. Stop burning people out. In exchange, you stop organizing resistance and let him buy up the properties of people who are willing to sell." "So he gets most of what he wants, and we get to keep a few scraps?" Evelyn said. "That's not negotiation. That's surrender with extra steps." "It's better than more people dying, Mrs. Holloway." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, accepting that offer just means he'll come back in a year or 2 when we're weaker and finish the job." Webb sighed. "I'm just the messenger. But for what it's worth, I think you should consider it. Voss isn't going to give up. He's already sent word to the territorial capital, calling in favors. Pretty soon he'll have legal authority backing him up. You won't just be fighting a land baron, you'll be fighting the law itself." "The law's supposed to protect people," Patterson said. "In theory. In practice, the law protects whoever has the most money and influence. And that ain't you folks." Webb mounted his horse. "I need an answer by tomorrow. Think about it, please." He rode away, leaving the offer hanging over the camp like a storm cloud. That night they gathered to discuss it. Opinion was divided. Some people wanted to accept. They were tired, scared, wounded. They'd made their stand and survived. Maybe that was enough. Others wanted to keep fighting. The raid had shown them they could win, at least sometimes. And accepting Voss's terms felt like betraying everyone who'd lost homes or family members to his aggression. The argument went in circles for hours. Finally, Evelyn stood up. "I'm not from here," she said. "I came west 6 months ago because I was running from one kind of powerlessness. I found a different kind waiting for me. The kind where men with money and guns decide who gets to build a life and who gets crushed. I ran from that before. I'm not running again." She looked around at the faces watching her, weather-beaten, exhausted, afraid but not broken. "We've all lost something to Voss. Homes, family, safety. Accepting his offer means accepting that he was right to take those things. It means teaching our children that might makes right and resistance is pointless." Her voice hardened. "I say we fight. Not because we'll definitely win, but because living on our knees is worse than dying on our feet." Silence. Then Nora stood. "I'm with her." Coleman stood. "Me too." One by one, others rose. Not everyone. Some stayed seated, faces troubled. But enough. More than enough. "Then it's decided," Cade said. "We tell Webb no, and we prepare for whatever comes next." The messenger returned the next morning. Cade met him at the perimeter and delivered their answer in 2 words. "We refuse." Webb nodded like he'd expected it. "Then may your stubbornness carry you through what's coming. You're going to need it." He rode back toward Voss's camp. They watched him go, knowing they'd just turned down their last chance at peace. The attack came that night, under a new moon when the darkness was complete. No warning, no demands, just sudden violence. Voss's men hit 3 sides of the camp at once, with torches and gunfire, trying to set everything ablaze and drive the defenders into a killing ground. But this time the defenders were ready. They'd prepared for exactly this kind of assault, with water barrels positioned strategically and fallback positions mapped out. The fires were contained. The attackers were driven back with heavy losses. What nobody expected was the explosion. It came from the eastern wall, where Voss's men had somehow placed charges against the stone. The blast tore through the night, sending rock and debris flying. A section of wall collapsed, opening a gap into the camp's interior. Men poured through, and suddenly the fighting was close and desperate. Evelyn found herself back to back with Nora, firing at shadows, trying to distinguish friend from enemy in the smoke and darkness. Someone grabbed her from behind. She twisted, drove her elbow into his ribs, felt him grunt, and loosen his grip. She spun and hit him with the rifle butt, dropping him. Everywhere was chaos, people screaming, gunfire, the smell of blood and burning wood. She'd lost sight of Cade in the confusion and panic clawed at her throat. Then she heard his voice, shouting orders, rallying defenders to seal the breach. She fought toward the sound, using the rifle as a club when enemies got too close, firing when she had clear shots. The battle lasted maybe 20 minutes, but felt like hours. Finally, impossibly, Voss's men withdrew again, leaving the camp battered and burning but still standing. Cade found Evelyn in the aftermath. They didn't speak, just held each other while around them people counted losses and tried to save what could be saved. 5 defenders dead, twice that many wounded. The eastern wall breached, supplies damaged, morale cracking under the sustained assault. "We can't take many more of these," Patterson said hoarsely. "We're losing too many people." "Then we end it," Cade said. "One way or another. Tomorrow." "How?" Evelyn looked at the breach in the wall, at the exhausted faces around her, at Cade's determined expression. An idea was forming, reckless and desperate, and maybe just crazy enough to work. "We stop defending," she said slowly. "We take the fight to him. All of us. Everything we have." "That's suicide," someone said. "So is staying here waiting to be ground down." She turned to Cade. "He expects us to be defensive, to protect what we have. What if we gamble everything on one attack? His camp, his men, everything. Winner takes all." "You're talking about a battle," Coleman said. "Not a skirmish, an actual battle." "Yes." The word hung in the air. What they were proposing went beyond defense, beyond resistance. It was open warfare, and everyone knew it. "If we lose," James Patterson said quietly, "we lose everything." "We're already losing everything," his father responded. "At least this way we go out swinging." They voted. Not everyone agreed, but the majority did. They would attack at dawn, throwing everything they had at Voss's position in one desperate gamble. Either they'd break him, or they'd be broken. No middle ground. That night, as they prepared weapons and said quiet goodbyes, Cade pulled Evelyn aside. "You know this is insane, right?" "Completely." "And you're still sure?" "I'm not sure of anything except that I love you, and I'm tired of being afraid." She took his face in her hands. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's all I know for certain." He kissed her like it might be the last time. Maybe it would be. "Together," he agreed. "Always." They spent their last quiet hours before dawn wrapped in each other's arms, stealing moments of peace before the storm. Around them, others did the same, holding loved ones, checking weapons, praying or cursing or simply sitting in silence. When the eastern sky started turning gray, they gathered. 15 families had started this resistance. Now maybe 40 people stood ready to fight, everyone who could hold a weapon. It wasn't an army, but it was enough. Cade stood before them, looking at faces he'd come to know over these brutal weeks. "I'm not good at speeches," he said, "so I'll keep this simple. What we're about to do is dangerous. Some of us won't come back, but we're doing it anyway because some things are worth fighting for. Home, family, the right to build a life without someone strong taking it away because they can." He paused, looking at Evelyn. She nodded. "Whatever happens today," he continued, "you've already won. You stood up. You fought back. You showed that ordinary people can resist tyranny. That's more than most ever do. So let's finish this. Together." A ragged cheer went up. Not loud, not confident, but determined. They moved out as the sun broke over the mountains, turning the valley gold. Every one of them knew they might be walking toward their deaths, and every one of them went anyway. That's what bravery looks like, Evelyn thought. Not the absence of fear, just the refusal to let fear win. They moved through the pre-dawn darkness in 3 groups, each taking a different approach to Voss's camp. Cade led the center force straight down the valley floor. Coleman took the left flank through the dense pine forest. Patterson and his sons circled right, using the high ground along the ridge. The plan was to hit from multiple angles simultaneously, create confusion, and press the attack before Voss's men could organize a proper defense. Evelyn stayed with Cade's group along with Nora and a dozen others. They moved quietly, weapons ready, every sense alert. The sky was lightening, but the sun hadn't broken the horizon yet. Everything existed in that strange half-light where shadows still held power. When they got within 200 yards of Voss's camp, Cade raised his hand. Everyone stopped. They could see smoke from morning cookfires, hear voices calling to each other as the camp woke. Sentries walked the perimeter, but they looked bored, routine. They weren't expecting an attack. Why would they? They'd been the aggressors from the start. The defenders had always been reactive, protective. Until now. Cade looked at Evelyn. In the dim light, his face was all hard angles and determination. Last chance to change your mind. Stop asking me that. Had to try. He turned to the others, gestured them forward. They advanced slowly, closing the distance. 100 yards, 75, 50. A sentry turned, squinting into the gloom. Evelyn could see the moment recognition hit him, the moment he realized what he was seeing. His mouth opened to shout. Cade fired. The sentry went down. And suddenly, everything was happening at once. The three groups hit the camp from different directions, gunfire erupting like thunder. Voss's men scrambled for weapons, diving for cover, shouting orders and curses. Tents caught fire. Horses screamed and pulled at their tethers. The careful organization of the camp dissolved into chaos. Evelyn fired, reloaded, fired again. Beside her, Nora was methodical as always, picking targets with cold precision. They advanced through the camp, using wagons and tents for cover, pushing deeper into enemy territory. A man came at Evelyn from the side. She turned too slowly, saw him raising his gun. Then Nora shot him, and he dropped. "Pay attention," Nora shouted. "Trying." They fought their way toward the center of the camp, where a large tent presumably belonged to Voss himself. That's where they'd find him, Evelyn reasoned. That's where this would end. But Voss had other plans. The counterattack came hard and organized. His men, despite the surprise, were professionals. They rallied quickly, formed defensive positions, started pushing back. The advancing groups found themselves taking heavy fire, their momentum stalling. Cade's force got pinned down behind a row of supply crates. Bullets whipped overhead, splintering wood, sending up puffs of dirt. On either side, Evelyn could hear the other groups engaged in similar struggles. The plan had been good, but execution was proving harder than anticipated. "We need to break through," Cade shouted over the gunfire. "Push to that tent. We'll be cut down. Then we better move fast." They tried. Half the group rose and charged forward while the others provided covering fire. 3 people fell in the first 10 yards. The rest made it to a wagon and dove behind it, breathing hard. "This isn't working," Coleman said. He'd appeared from the left flank, his face blackened with powder smoke. "We're losing too many people." "We keep pushing," Cade said. To what end? We can't reach Voss if we're all dead." Before Cade could respond, a new sound cut through the gunfire. A bell, ringing frantically from somewhere in town. Everyone paused, confused. The fighting didn't stop, but it slowed, people trying to figure out what the alarm meant. Then riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the camp. 20 of them, maybe more. For a horrible moment, Evelyn thought Voss had reinforcements arriving. Then she recognized the man in front, Marshal Webb. And behind him, townspeople, shopkeepers and farmers, and ordinary citizens who'd been too afraid to take sides before. They sat on their horses looking down at the battle, and Webb was shouting something Evelyn couldn't quite hear over the gunfire. Voss emerged from his tent, saw the riders, and his face went white. Whatever Webb was saying, it wasn't good news. The marshal rode down into the camp, holding a paper high. "Gideon Voss, you're under arrest." The shooting stopped. Everyone stared. "What?" Voss's voice was pure disbelief. "Territorial governor sent a wire. Seems someone filed complaints about your methods. Murder, arson, intimidation. The list is long." Webb dismounted, still holding the paper. "You're done, Voss. It's over." "Like hell it is." Voss drew his pistol and aimed it at Webb. That's when everything went wrong. Someone fired. Evelyn never figured out who, and suddenly everyone was shooting again. Webb dove for cover. The townspeople scattered. Voss's men, realizing they were now surrounded and legally in the wrong, started breaking. Some threw down their weapons. Others tried to fight their way out. A few just ran, disappearing into the forest. The camp descended into complete chaos. Evelyn saw Voss making for the horses, trying to escape. Without thinking, she ran after him. She heard Cade shouting her name, but she didn't stop. Voss had orchestrated all of this, all the death, all the suffering. She wasn't letting him walk away. She caught up to him as he was mounting. She grabbed his leg and pulled. He kicked at her face, but she ducked, held on. The horse reared. Voss fell, landing hard. He came up with the pistol aimed at her chest. "You stupid woman. This is your fault, all of it. If you'd just stayed in Boston where you belonged." Cade appeared and hit Voss with such force the man went sprawling. The pistol flew from his hand. Cade stood over him, breathing hard, his own gun pointed at Voss's head. "Give me a reason," Cade said quietly. Voss stared up at him, and Evelyn saw real fear in the land baron's eyes for the first time. "You won't shoot me. You're not a killer. I've killed plenty of men. One more won't keep me awake." "Cade," Evelyn said softly. He didn't look at her, didn't lower the gun. "He deserves it," Cade said. "Maybe, but you don't deserve to carry it." She stepped closer. "Let Webb take him. Let the law handle it. The law's never handled men like him." "Then maybe it's time it started." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Cade lowered the gun. Webb's deputies rushed in and hauled Voss to his feet, clapping irons on his wrists. "You think this matters?" Voss shouted as they dragged him away. "I've got lawyers. I've got connections. I'll be out before winter." Maybe he would be. Probably he would be. But right now, in this moment, he was defeated. And sometimes that had to be enough. The battle ended not with a climax, but with exhaustion. Voss's men surrendered or fled. The townspeople helped round up the ones who stayed. Webb and his deputies started sorting through the mess, who to arrest, who to let go, how to explain any of this to the territorial authorities. Evelyn found herself sitting on the ground near what was left of Voss's tent, too tired to stand. Her hands were shaking again. The adrenaline was wearing off and leaving behind just pain and exhaustion and the weight of everything they'd done. Nora dropped down beside her. "You all right?" "I don't know. Are you?" "I'm alive. That'll do for now." They sat in silence, watching the aftermath. People tending wounded, collecting the dead, too many dead on both sides, trying to process what had just happened and what it meant. Cade appeared, looking as worn out as Evelyn felt. He sat down heavily on her other side. "Patterson's dead," he said flatly. "Took a bullet to the chest in the final push. Died before we could get to him." "His son? Alive? Shattered, but alive?" Cade rubbed his face. "We lost 8 people, 14 wounded. For what? A man who'll probably go free anyway?" "For the right to stay on our land," Evelyn said. "For showing that resistance is possible. For not giving up. Was it worth 8 lives? I don't know. Ask me in a year." Webb walked over, looking exhausted. "You folks need to get your wounded back to your camp. I'll send the doctor up when he's done here." "What happens now?" Cade asked. "Now? We sort through this mess. Voss will be charged, tried. Whether he's convicted..." Webb shrugged. "That's above my level. But for what it's worth, I'll testify about what he did. So will others from town. Maybe that counts for something." "Why'd you come?" Evelyn asked. "You could have stayed out of it." "Because Timothy Harrison was 17 years old, and his mama came to me crying, asking why nobody stopped this before her boy died. I didn't have a good answer." Webb looked at the destroyed camp, the bodies being carried out. "I should have come sooner, should have done something before it got this far. Can't change that. But I could at least show up at the end." He walked away, leaving them sitting in the wreckage of what felt like both victory and defeat. They made it back to their camp by mid-morning. The people who'd stayed behind came running when they saw the group returning, joy and relief transforming to grief as they counted the missing. Families learned they were now widows, orphans, alone. Evelyn helped tend the wounded, wrapping injuries, distributing what little medicine they had, offering what comfort she could. Her hands moved automatically while her mind kept circling back to the same question. Had this been worth it? 8 people dead. Families destroyed. A community torn apart. And for what? Voss might go free. Even if he didn't, someone else like him would eventually appear. The frontier didn't run short of men who thought power gave them the right to take whatever they wanted. But then she thought about the alternative. Surrendering. Giving up their homes without a fight. Teaching the next generation that resistance was pointless and power always won. Maybe that was worse. Maybe fighting and losing was still better than not fighting at all. She didn't know. She might never know. That night, they buried their dead on a hillside overlooking the valley. No preacher, no formal ceremony, just people saying goodbye to friends and family, marking graves with stones and rough wooden crosses. Patterson went into the ground next to young Timothy Harrison, Ellen, who died from her wounds during the final battle. 3 others whose names Evelyn had barely learned before they were gone. As the sun set, turning the sky orange and purple, Cade stood before the graves and spoke. I don't have pretty words for this. Death isn't pretty. Losing people isn't noble. It's just hard and it hurts, and we have to figure out how to keep living anyway. He paused, struggling. These people died defending something they believed in, died standing up instead of bowing down. That's all any of us can hope for, to die on our feet instead of our knees. Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, stepping off a train into humiliation and despair. That woman would have broken under this, would have run or collapsed or given up, but she wasn't that woman anymore. The frontier had ground her down and rebuilt her into something harder, something that could withstand loss and keep moving forward. She didn't know if that was a good thing or just a necessary thing, but it was true. After the burial, people dispersed slowly, returning to the ruined camp to figure out what came next. Cade and Evelyn stayed behind, standing among the graves as darkness fell. I keep thinking about what you said, Cade finally spoke, about asking you in a year if it was worth it. What about it? I don't think I can wait a year. I need to know now if you regret this. If you regret coming west, staying here, fighting this fight. Evelyn considered the question seriously. Did she regret it? She'd lost her innocence, her illusions about how the world worked. She'd killed people. She'd watched people die. She'd discovered depths of courage and cruelty in herself she hadn't known existed. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. I hate that people died. I hate that we had to fight at all. But I don't regret choosing to stand up. I don't regret finding you. I don't regret becoming who I am now instead of who I was. Even though who you are now is someone who's killed, who's seen friends die. Even though. Because who I was before was someone who let the world happen to her. Who I am now is someone who happens to the world. She turned to face him. We're not the same people we were 6 months ago. Maybe that's sad, but maybe it's also necessary. He pulled her close, and they stood there among the graves while stars emerged overhead. 2 people who'd survived something terrible together and weren't sure yet what that meant for tomorrow. The next morning brought unexpected visitors again. A group of riders approached the camp under a white flag. Not Voss's men this time, but territorial officials, a judge, 2 lawyers, a surveyor, and an escort of marshals. The judge was an older man named Harlan, with white hair and sharp eyes. He dismounted and looked around at the damaged camp, the wounded people, the evidence of recent violence. I'm here to sort out what happened, he said without preamble, and to determine who owns what land. There's been conflicting claims, fraudulent titles, and enough legal mess to keep lawyers busy for years. So I'm cutting through it. Over the next week, Judge Harlan held hearings. People testified about Voss's actions, about the burnings and intimidation and murders, about fraudulent land claims and corrupt dealings. The judge listened to everything, took notes, asked pointed questions. Evelyn testified about her own experience, about watching homes burn and families displaced, about the choice between fighting and surrendering. Cade testified about Voss's threats and the systematic campaign to drive them out. When it was over, Judge Harlan rendered his decision. Voss's land claims were voided. His holdings would be redistributed to the families he'd displaced. The people who'd fought to defend their homes would keep them. New titles would be drawn up, legal and clear. This doesn't make up for the lives lost, Harlan said. Nothing can do that. But at least it ensures their deaths meant something, that their fight wasn't for nothing. Voss himself was transported to the territorial capital to stand trial for murder. Whether he'd be convicted was anyone's guess. Rich men rarely faced real consequences. But at least he was gone. At least for now. As the officials packed up to leave, Harlan approached Cade and Evelyn privately. You 2 started something here, he said. People are talking about it all over the territory. About small ranchers standing up to a land baron. About resistance being possible. That's going to have consequences. Good ones or bad ones? Evelyn asked. Both, probably. Good, because other communities might find the courage to stand up when they're threatened. Bad, because powerful men don't like the precedent. They'll be watching you, testing you, trying to make sure this doesn't spread. Harlan studied them. You ready for that? Don't have much choice, Cade said. No, I suppose you don't. Harlan mounted his horse. For what it's worth, I hope you make it. The frontier needs more people like you, people who won't just roll over. He rode away with his entourage, leaving the camp to begin the long process of rebuilding. And rebuild they did. Slowly, painfully, one day at a time. They repaired the damaged walls, they replanted crops that had been destroyed. They helped families whose homes had burned construct new ones. The work was endless and exhausting and necessary. Evelyn threw herself into it, grateful for physical labor that kept her mind occupied. Every time she stopped working, she found herself thinking about the people who died, about whether different choices might have saved them, about whether she'd led people to their deaths through stubbornness or courage, and whether there was even a difference. One evening, about a month after the final battle, she found Nora sitting alone on a hillside overlooking the valley. The other woman had been distant lately, working hard but speaking little. Mind if I sit? Evelyn asked. Free country. They sat in silence, watching the sun set over mountains that looked peaceful now that the fighting had stopped. I've been thinking about leaving, Nora said suddenly. Why? Because every time I look at this valley, I remember the fight. I remember who died. I remember being so scared I couldn't breathe, but fighting anyway because the alternative was worse. She pulled up a stalk of grass, twisted it between her fingers. I'm tired, Evelyn. Bone tired. And I don't know if I have the strength to do this again if another Voss shows up. So you'd rather run? I'd rather find somewhere I can just live, without fighting, without constant threats, somewhere I can plant crops and raise animals and not worry about someone trying to take it all away. Evelyn understood that impulse. She felt it herself sometimes, the desire to escape to somewhere easier. But she'd learned something about herself over these months. She didn't want easy. She wanted meaningful. And meaningful was almost always hard. If you need to go, go, she said. Nobody would blame you. You've earned the right to peace. Have I? Or have I just earned the right to feel guilty for wanting it? Those aren't the same thing. Nora looked at her. Will you stay? Even knowing another fight might come. Yes. Why? Because this is home now. Because Cade's here. Because we built something worth defending, and I'm not ready to abandon it just because defending it's hard. You're braver than me. I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. Nora laughed, a real laugh that sounded rusty from disuse. Maybe. Or maybe stubborn is just another word for brave. In the end, Nora stayed. So did most of the others. A few families left, unable to face the memories or the possibility of future violence. But the core group remained, bound together by shared trauma and shared survival. Life gradually returned to something approaching normal. Crops grew. Animals multiplied. Children played in areas that had been battlefields. The physical scars of the conflict faded, though the emotional ones remained. Cade and Evelyn's relationship deepened in the aftermath, forged stronger by everything they'd survived together. They rebuilt the barn that had burned in Voss's first attack, bigger and better than before. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room. They talked about the future in concrete terms instead of hypotheticals. One night in late autumn, almost a full year after Evelyn had first arrived in Blackstone Ridge, they sat on their porch watching the first snow of the season fall softly over the valley. You know what I realized? Cade said. What? I'm happy. Actually happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again after losing Sarah and Thomas. But somehow, against all odds, here I am. Evelyn took his hand. I'm glad. Are you? Happy, I mean? She thought about it. Happy seemed like a strange word for what she felt. She was scarred, changed, harder than she'd been. But she was also stronger, more capable, more herself than she'd ever been in Boston. I'm alive, she said. I'm here with you. I'm doing work that matters. Is that happy? Maybe. Or maybe it's something better than happy. Maybe it's real. He squeezed her hand. Real's good enough for me. They sat together as snow covered the valley, transforming it into something clean and new. The past year had been brutal, but they'd survived it. They'd fought and bled and lost people they cared about, but they'd also won something precious: the right to stay, the right to build, the right to say this land was theirs, earned not through purchase, but through sacrifice. Somewhere in town, in a jail cell awaiting trial, Gideon Voss probably still believed he'd win in the end, that money and connections would set him free, that people like Evelyn and Cade were just temporary obstacles. Maybe he was right. Maybe the powerful always won eventually, but not today. Today belonged to the people who'd stood up and fought back. Today belonged to homesteaders and ranchers and ordinary people who'd refused to bow. And for today, that was enough. Winter settled over the valley with a finality that felt almost peaceful after the violence of summer and autumn. The snow came heavy and stayed, covering the graves on the hillside, burying the scars left by battle, making everything look clean and new even though underneath nothing had really changed. Evelyn stood at the window of their expanded cabin, watching dawn break over the mountains. Behind her, she could hear Cade building up the fire, the familiar sounds of morning routine. A year and a half had passed since she'd stepped off that train into humiliation and discovered that sometimes the worst moments of your life are actually doorways to something better. "Coffee's ready," Cade said. She turned from the window and accepted the cup he offered. Their hands touched briefly, a small moment of connection that still felt significant after everything they'd been through. "Nora's coming by later," Evelyn said. "She wants to talk about expanding the cooperative. We barely got the first one working. That's why she wants to expand it, because it is working." The cooperative had been Evelyn's idea, born from those desperate weeks of organizing resistance against Voss. After the fighting ended, they'd kept the structure, families pooling resources, sharing labor, helping each other through the brutal work of frontier survival. What had started as a military necessity had become something more, a new way of living that spread beyond their valley to other communities facing similar struggles. Cade sipped his coffee, looking thoughtful. "You know, people are going to keep coming here, looking for help, looking for answers. You ready for that?" "No, but I'll do it anyway." He smiled. That was their pattern now, facing things they weren't ready for and figuring it out as they went. It wasn't graceful or easy, but it worked. Nora arrived mid-morning, riding through snow that came up to her horse's knees. She'd filled out over the winter, the gaunt desperation replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. Not happiness exactly, too much had been lost for simple happiness, but a kind of hard-won peace. They gathered around the table while Nora spread out a hand-drawn map showing the surrounding territory. "3 more communities have asked to join," she said, pointing to marks on the map. "That's 15 families total, spread across maybe 100 square miles. If we organize properly, share equipment and knowledge, we could all do better than we're doing separately." "That's a lot of coordination," Cade said. "A lot of trust." "We've already proven we can trust each other. We fought together. Some of us died together. If that doesn't earn trust, what does?" Evelyn studied the map. Each mark represented people trying to survive in a landscape that wanted to kill them, under a system that favored the strong and crushed the weak. What they were proposing wasn't just practical cooperation, it was a different way of thinking about community and power. "What do you need from us?" she asked. "Leadership. People know you two. They know what you did to stop Voss. They'll listen to you." "We're not leaders," Cade said. "We're just people who got pushed into a corner and pushed back. That's exactly why they'll listen. You're not some distant authority. You're them. You've lost the same things they've lost. You've bled the same dirt." Nora leaned forward. "The frontier's changing. It's not just about individual survival anymore. It's about whether ordinary people can build something that lasts, or whether men with money and guns always win eventually. You helped to prove it's possible to fight back. Now help prove it's possible to build something better." Evelyn looked at Cade. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Your call," the gesture said. She thought about the woman who'd arrived in Blackstone Ridge with nothing but a carpet bag and shattered dreams. That woman would have been terrified of this kind of responsibility. But that woman didn't exist anymore. She'd been remade by hardship into someone who understood that leadership wasn't about being perfect or fearless. It was about being willing to try when trying mattered. "All right," Evelyn said. "We'll do it." Over the following weeks, they rode to each of the communities, meeting families who'd heard stories about the battle with Voss and wanted to be part of something larger than their own survival. Some were hopeful. Others were skeptical. All of them were desperate in the quiet way frontier people got desperate, where you kept working because stopping meant dying. At the Morrison homestead, a widow named Catherine asked the question Evelyn had been dreading. What happens when the next Voss comes? Because someone like him always comes eventually. Rich men don't stop wanting to own everything just because one of them went to jail. You're right, Evelyn said. Someone like him will come again. Maybe not this year or next year, but eventually. The question isn't whether we'll face that again. The question is whether we'll face it alone or together. Together didn't save everyone last time. No, it didn't. People died, good people. But together gave us a chance. Alone, we wouldn't have had even that. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. My husband died in a blizzard 2 winters ago. I've been trying to hold this place together by myself since then. Some days I think about just giving up, moving back east, finding some factory job and being done with all this. She looked out at her land, rough, beautiful, unforgiving. But then I think about him, about how hard he worked to build this, and I can't just walk away from it. You shouldn't have to, Evelyn said. That's the point of this. So people like you don't have to choose between giving up and dying alone. Catherine joined the cooperative that day. By early spring, they had 23 families committed. They established a system for sharing equipment, plows, wagons, tools that most families couldn't afford individually. They created a rotating labor pool where people helped each other during critical times like planting and harvest. They set up a supply depot where bulk purchases could be made and distributed, saving everyone money. It was messy and imperfect and required constant negotiation. People argued about fair distribution, about who was pulling their weight, about 1,000 small decisions that had to be made collectively. But it worked better than everyone struggling alone. Word spread. By summer, they had 40 families. By autumn, 60. The cooperative became known throughout the territory as something new, a way for small ranchers and homesteaders to survive without surrendering their independence or their dignity. And with that growth came attention they didn't want. The letter arrived in October, delivered by a nervous writer who wouldn't stay for coffee. It was addressed to the leaders of the High Country Cooperative, an elegant script that reminded Evelyn unpleasantly of Voss's handwriting. Cade read it aloud. Gentlemen and ladies, we represent a consortium of business interests concerned about instability in the territorial economy. Your organization, while admirable in intent, has created market disruptions that affect legitimate commerce. We would like to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. Please meet our representative at the Blackstone Ridge Courthouse on November 1st. Regards, the Western Territories Development Company. That's not a request, Nora said. She'd come to rely on Cade and Evelyn's judgment enough that she was at their cabin most days now, helping coordinate the growing cooperative. That's a threat dressed up in fancy language. What do they want? Evelyn asked. Same thing Voss wanted, control. They just learned from his mistakes. You can't crush people openly without consequence, so they'll try to co-opt us instead. Offer money, partnerships, positions, make it look voluntary. And if we refuse, then they'll find other ways to hurt us. Legal challenges, supply disruptions, whatever it takes. Cade set the letter down. Question is whether we fight them or try to negotiate. We can't negotiate with people who think they have the right to own us, Evelyn said. We also can't fight everyone. Eventually, we'll lose. So what? We just surrender? Let them turn the cooperative into something they control? I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to be smart about this. They argued for hours, going in circles. Nora eventually left, frustrated. Cade and Evelyn continued into the night, their voices rising and falling like tides. You've changed, Cade said finally. What's that supposed to mean? You've gotten harder, more willing to fight. Sometimes I look at you and I don't recognize the woman who stepped off that train. The words stung because they were true. Evelyn had changed. The frontier did that, ground you down and rebuilt you into something that could survive it. But surviving came with cost she was still calculating. Would you prefer I'd stayed soft? She asked. Stayed helpless? That woman wouldn't have survived a week out here. I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying there's a difference between being strong and being hard. One keeps you alive, the other kills something inside you. Maybe that something needed to die. Did it? Or are you just telling yourself that because it's easier than admitting what you've lost? Evelyn stood up abruptly. I'm going to bed. Evelyn, I don't want to talk about this anymore. She climbed to the loft, their loft now, not hers separately from his, and lay staring at the ceiling beams. Outside, wind moved through the pines with a sound like whispered arguments. She thought about this woman she'd been. Polite, deferential, afraid of confrontation. That woman had been weak, yes, but she'd also been kind in ways Evelyn wasn't sure she was anymore. She'd believed in fairness and justice and the basic goodness of people. Now she believed in power, in the necessity of fighting, in meeting force with force because anything else was just slow-motion surrender. When had that shift happened? During the battle with Voss? Earlier, during the long winter of learning to survive? Or had it been gradual, each small hardship filing away another piece of the person she'd been until someone new stood in her place? She heard Cade climbing the ladder. He lay down beside her without speaking, and they existed in uncomfortable silence for a long time. I'm sorry, he finally said. For what? For making you feel like you have to defend who you've become. You're right. The woman who stepped off that train wouldn't have survived. And I'm grateful every day that you're strong enough to be here. He struggled for words. I just don't want you to lose yourself entirely in the process of surviving. What if there's no self left to lose? What if this is who I actually am, and the Boston version was just pretending? I don't believe that. I think you're both. The woman who wants to fight for what's right, and the woman who remembers kindness matters. They're not opposites. They're supposed to work together. Evelyn rolled over to face him. In the darkness, she could barely see his features, but she knew them by heart now. I'm scared, she admitted, of this company, of what's coming, of turning into someone who only knows how to fight. Then we don't let that happen. We fight when we have to, but we also remember what we're fighting for, not just survival, something better than survival. What's better than survival? Living. Actually living. Building things, helping people, creating the kind of world where someone like you can step off a train without being destroyed by it. She kissed him then, grateful for his steadiness, for the way he could anchor her when she felt herself drifting towards something dark and cold. I love you, she said. I love you too. Even when you're being stubborn and impossible. Especially then. They went to the meeting in November, but not alone. They brought Nora and Coleman and a dozen others from the cooperative, filling the courthouse with their presence. The company's representative, a smooth-talking man named Phillips, looked surprised to see so many people. I was expecting the leadership, he said. We're all the leadership, Evelyn replied. Decisions get made together. Phillips adjusted his approach smoothly. He talked about investment opportunities, about bringing capital and efficiency to their operation, about partnerships that would benefit everyone. He made it sound reasonable, even generous. What you're really offering, Cade said when Phillips finally stopped talking, is to buy us out. Make us employees instead of owners. Take what we built and turn it into another thing rich men control. I'm offering stability, growth, protection from the kind of violence you experienced with Gideon Voss, who's now in prison because we protected ourselves. For now. But his associates are still active. His allies still hold grudges. Wouldn't you prefer to avoid that kind of conflict? At what cost? Nora asked. What do we give up in exchange for your protection? Nothing significant, just decision-making authority on major expenditures and strategic direction. So everything that matters, Evelyn said. You want us to give you control and trust you'll use it fairly. Why would we do that after spending a year proving we don't need owners? Philip's smile thinned. Because the alternative is going back to constant struggle. Fighting for every inch, watching more of your people die because you're too proud to accept help. That's not help, Coleman said. That's conquest with better manners. Think carefully about this, Phillips said, standing. My employers are patient, but they're also accustomed to getting what they want, one way or another. After he left, the courthouse erupted into argument. Some people wanted to accept, or at least negotiate. Others wanted to tell the company to go to hell. The debate went on for hours. Finally, Evelyn stood up, and the room gradually quieted. I came here with nothing, she said. Less than nothing. I came here humiliated and broken and convinced my life was over. But I learned something in this valley. I learned that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, about refusing to stay beaten. She looked around at the faces watching her, weathered, tired, but still defiant. This company thinks we're desperate enough to surrender our independence for safety. Maybe we are desperate, but desperation makes you weak only if you let it. Otherwise, it makes you dangerous. It makes you willing to risk everything because you've already lost everything that mattered except your ability to choose. She paused, gathering her thoughts. We built something here. Not perfect, not easy, but ours. We made it ourselves through shared work and shared sacrifice. Men like Phillips can't understand that because they've never built anything. They only know how to own things other people built. So here's what I think we should do. Tell them no. Tell them we're not for sale. Tell them we'd rather struggle free than prosper in chains. And when they come after us, someone asked, because they will. Then we'll face it the same way we faced Voss. Together, fighting for something that matters instead of just surviving. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was clear. They refused the company's offer. Phillips's response came quickly. Within weeks, the cooperative found itself facing problems. Suddenly, supply merchants wouldn't sell to them. Equipment orders were delayed indefinitely. A bank that had been willing to extend credit changed its mind. Every economic pressure point was being squeezed simultaneously. It hurt. Families struggled. Some left the cooperative, unable to handle the pressure. Others stayed but complained constantly about the decision to refuse help. Through it all, Evelyn and Cade held the group together by sheer stubbornness. They found new suppliers, even if they cost more. They helped families who were struggling with loans from the collective pool. They reminded people constantly why they'd made this choice. But the strain showed. Evelyn stopped sleeping well. Cade grew quieter, withdrawing into himself the way he had before she'd arrived. Their arguments became more frequent, sharper. One night in February, after a particularly brutal day of dealing with problems, Evelyn found herself standing outside in the snow, too angry and frustrated to stay inside. Cade came out after her. "You're going to freeze." "Don't care." "Yes, you do." "Why did I think this would work?" she said. "Why did I think we could actually build something that would last? The rich always win. Always. We're just making it take longer." "You don't believe that." "Don't I?" "Look around, Cade. We're losing. Slowly, but losing. Eventually, everyone will be gone or broken, and Phillips will get what he wanted anyway. Then we find another way." "There is no other way. That's the whole point. The system is designed to crush people like us." "Then we change the system." "How? We're barely surviving as it is." "I don't know how, but I know giving up isn't the answer." He turned her to face him. "You stood in that courthouse and told everyone that desperation makes you dangerous. Did you mean it, or was that just a speech?" "I meant it." "Then prove it. Figure out what we're missing. Find the angle we haven't tried. You're the one who's good at this, at seeing possibilities nobody else sees." Evelyn wanted to argue, but he was right. She'd spent so much time reacting to problems that she'd stopped thinking strategically. They'd been playing defense when they needed to play offense. "We need to go bigger," she said slowly. "What?" "The company thinks we're just one cooperative. One isolated problem they can squeeze until we break. What if we weren't isolated? What if we connected with other cooperatives in other territories, built something too big to crush? That's ambitious. Ambition's all we have left." They spent the rest of that winter and the following spring reaching out to other communities facing similar pressures. It turned out they weren't alone. All over the frontier, ordinary people were organizing against concentrated power. Some efforts were more successful than others, but all of them shared the same basic understanding. Divided, they'd be picked off one by one. United, they might actually survive. By summer, they'd formed a loose network of cooperatives spanning 3 territories. They shared resources, information, strategies. When one group faced pressure, others would help. It wasn't perfect, coordination was difficult, and not everyone agreed on priorities, but it worked better than isolation. The company tried to adapt, but they'd been playing a different game. They knew how to pressure individual communities. They didn't know how to handle a distributed network with no central point of failure. Word spread. More communities joined. The movement became too large to ignore, too visible to crush quietly. Newspapers started writing about it, some sympathetically, others with barely concealed contempt. Politicians began taking positions, recognizing that these people represented votes. 2 years after Evelyn had stepped off that train, she stood in the territorial capital giving testimony before a legislative committee about cooperative economics and frontier justice. She wore her best dress, still the blue wool from that first day, though it had been mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric, and spoke clearly about the choice between concentrated power and distributed resistance. Some committee members listened. Others dismissed her as a troublemaker. But the hearing happened, which meant the issue could no longer be ignored. Afterward, standing on the Capitol steps, Nora said, "You know you've become exactly what Silas Boone thought you couldn't be, right?" "What's that?" "Someone who matters, someone who changed things." Evelyn thought about that humiliation at the train station, about standing there while men laughed at her suffering. It felt like it had happened to a different person in a different life. "I didn't change things," she said. "A lot of people did. I just happened to be there when it started." "You were more than there. You were the spark." Nora smiled. "Own it. You've earned it." They returned to the valley in late autumn as winter threatened. The cabin looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. The valley wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to something larger. A movement, an idea, a different way of thinking about power and community. Cade was waiting on the porch when they arrived. He looked older, more tired, but also more at peace than she'd ever seen him. "How'd it go?" he asked. 3 committee members committed to supporting cooperative protections. 2 more are considering it. The rest think we're dangerous radicals who will destroy civilization. "Not bad odds." "Not good ones either." "No, but better than when you started." He pulled her close. "I'm proud of you." "For what? Making speeches?" "Anyone could do that." "For refusing to accept that the world has to be the way it's always been." "For showing people that change is possible." He kissed her forehead. "For stepping off that train broken and becoming someone who helps fix other broken things." That night, lying in bed while snow fell softly outside, Evelyn thought about everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation, the desperate choice to trust a stranger, the brutal education of frontier survival, the violence and loss and hard-won victories. She'd lost things along the way. Innocence, illusions, the softer parts of herself that couldn't survive the grinding work of building something new. But she'd gained things too, strength, purpose, the knowledge that she could face terrible things and not shatter. "Do you think it'll last?" she asked Cade. "What we built?" "I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not. Things have a way of falling apart." "That's not very optimistic." "I'm not an optimist, but I'm also not a pessimist. I'm just someone who knows the only certainty is that nothing lasts forever, so what matters is what you do with the time you have." And what have we done? We've shown people that resistance is possible, that ordinary people can organize and fight back and sometimes even win. Whether it lasts a year or a century, that matters. It changes what people think is possible. Evelyn understood what he meant. The specifics of their cooperative might not survive, might fall apart, or be co-opted, or simply fade away. But the idea of it, the proof that it could work even briefly, would persist. Other people in other places would hear the story and think, if they could do it, maybe we can too. That was the real victory, she realized. Not defeating Voss or resisting the company or building a network of cooperatives. The real victory was demonstrating that defeat wasn't inevitable, that people didn't have to accept powerlessness as their natural condition. "I love you," she said. "I love you too. Even though you dragged me into becoming a revolutionary when all I wanted was to hide from the world. You're terrible at hiding. I know, you ruined me for isolation." They fell asleep holding each other. 2 people who'd found salvation in shared struggle, who'd learned that sometimes the only way forward is through. Years passed. The cooperative grew, contracted, evolved. Some initiatives failed. Others succeeded beyond expectations. The fight against concentrated power never ended. New Vosses appeared. New companies tried new strategies. The fundamental conflict between those who had power and those who wanted it distributed differently continued in new forms. But the valley itself became something special. A place people spoke about in other territories, where that woman had stepped off a train into humiliation and transformed it into the beginning of something larger. Where ordinary people had stood up to power and sometimes won. Children grew up hearing the stories. about the barn burning, about the battle in the mountain camp, about desperate people organizing and fighting and building something new. The details got embellished over time, made more dramatic, but the core truth remained. It had happened. Real people had done it. Evelyn and Cade grew older together, their bodies wearing down from years of hard labor, but their connection deepening. They never became legendary figures despite the stories. They remained stubbornly ordinary, still fixing fences and tending animals and dealing with all the mundane struggles of frontier life. But they changed things. Not single-handedly, not permanently, but meaningfully. They'd shown that change was possible, and sometimes that's all it takes. Proof that the world isn't fixed, that people can reshape it through collective action and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. On the evening of their 25th anniversary, measured not from any official ceremony but from the day Evelyn had arrived in Blackstone Ridge, they sat on their porch watching the sun set over mountains that had witnessed so much struggle and survival. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't gotten off that train?" Cade asked. "Sometimes. But then I remember that woman didn't really exist. She was just someone I was pretending to be until life forced me to become who I actually am." "And who are you?" Evelyn considered the question. She was someone who'd been broken and rebuilt. Someone who'd discovered that strength comes from surviving things you thought would destroy you. Someone who'd learned that power isn't something you're given. It's something you take and defend and use to help others take their own. "I'm someone who refused to stay humiliated," she said finally. "Someone who chose to stand up even when standing up seemed impossible. Someone who learned that the only unforgivable thing is accepting defeat without fighting back." "That's not an easy way to live." "No, but it's an honest one." They sat together as stars emerged, as the valley darkened, as another day ended on land they'd defended and built and transformed through sheer determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did. But they'd face them the same way they'd faced everything else. Together, stubborn, and absolutely refusing to break. The frontier had tried to destroy Evelyn Mercer. Instead, it had forged her into something harder and more enduring than anyone, including herself, had imagined possible. And in the process, she'd helped forge a community, a movement, an idea that would outlast any individual. That was the real story, she thought. Not about one woman's triumph over humiliation, but about what happens when ordinary people refuse to accept that their ordinariness means powerlessness. When they organize, when they fight, when they build something together that none of them could build alone. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles. But down in the valley, lights glowed in cabin windows where families lived and worked and passed down stories about the time when resistance became possible, where defeat had been transformed into determination and humiliation had sparked a fire that still burned. And that, Evelyn knew, was enough. Not perfect, not permanent, but enough.